Ladies, when did you get to remind your chauvinist salesperson who the real client was? We wanted a fence around our house. I've always worked from home, and my husband has always worked in a field where he can't take time to meet with contractors and people like that. He and I agree on terms up front, and then I make decisions from there. It doesn't matter in life, but for this story, it does. I make more than my husband, by the way. We'd already agreed on this company based on various factors. A man came over to give an estimate during a workday, which ended up being less than we expected to pay. I was ready to sign the papers, and he said, "I'd rather talk to your husband about the numbers and get his signature since he'll be the one paying for it." I asked him to leave my property and never come back. Okay, mine wasn't a salesperson, but I am a female business owner with a male business partner. I've had a few customers born in the dark ages and reps that asked to speak to my boss, but the worst was a guy who snapped his fingers and told me to put the kettle on, girlie. Needless to say, he didn't get his cuppa, and he certainly didn't get the discount he asked for. When I was a baby, for some reason I wouldn't latch on when my mother fed me, so I wasn't eating well. The doctor completely ignored my mum and only talked to my dad because apparently she was too hysterical. He was on the verge of finding out what hysterical looked like. A while back, my wife and I were hitting up local dealerships trying to find a replacement car for her 2006 Nissan Subcompact. The first thing I'd tell each salesman was that we were shopping around for a daily for her to drive. The Honda dealership was a stereotypical car salesman. We can't even let her take a test drive unless she shows intent to buy. The Ford dealership ignored her completely and tried to sell me a Mustang. Toyota was like, "Oh, you must want to look at our insert soccer mum vehicle here." But when we got to Mazda, I told the sales guy the same thing that we were looking for her next car. And he immediately nodded, turned to her and asked, "What do you look for in a car?" And then he just listened to her. He didn't ask me anything for the rest of the time we were there, focused entirely on her and answering her questions. Never rushed her or pushed her towards a different model. So yeah, we'll probably be getting her a Soul Red Mazda 3 because of that guy. Absolutely wild how just following the assignment was the clincher of that deal, and that it didn't happen until the fourth attempt is just downright bewildering. This video is not sponsored by Mazda. Husband and I took my daughter to urgent care for stitches. Husband was holding the kid, and I checked her in at the front desk iPad. Front desk looks at my husband and asks for the insurance card. We're on my insurance, so I hand him the card. Next, he tells my husband the copay, looking at him behind me when I'm the one standing at the damn desk. I pull out my card with my name on it and pay. Butthole. I took my colleague out to lunch. He wasn't a subordinate, he was at the same level. However, I was given the company card and he wasn't due to the nature of our jobs. When the bill came around, the waitress gave it to him because she assumed he'd be paying. He graciously grabbed the bill and gave it to me and said, "She's the boss." Smart move. Made me feel validated and he got a free lunch. I've been on the flip side of this. For years, I worked at bicycle shops and regularly sold some pretty expensive bikes. One day, a couple came in. The wife was interested in a bike, and it quickly became apparent that the husband was an overpowering, domineering type. She wants this, she doesn't want to do that, she likes this, she doesn't like that, etc., etc. When it became clear that she wasn't being allowed to do much speaking at all, I'd let the husband ask the question, and I'd reply by physically turning and giving the answer to the wife, making eye contact with her only, and pointedly ignoring the husband. It was pretty blatant. She loved it. She lit up, engaged with me, and genuinely seemed to enjoy the process of learning more about riding and getting into a new sport or hobby. Yeah, this side is rough, especially in the tattoo industry. The amount of couples that come in and the husband won't let the wife talk about the tattoo she wants on her frickin' body. Fortunately, it's an industry where getting told to F off is not uncommon, so saying, "Mate, if you keep talking over the top of your partner, this is going to be a frickin' crap tattoo, so how about you wait outside while we finish the consult?" is rarely frowned upon. It never goes down well, but screw those guys. It's not so much about a particular story, but when I was shopping for a car several years ago, the salesman at every dealership kept talking to my husband instead of me, even though I was the one who contacted the dealerships and made sure to introduce myself first. My husband got sick of it and started telling them, "Don't talk to me, it's not my car, talk to her." I wound up buying from a saleswoman who treated us equally until she pretty quickly figured out my husband wasn't involved whatsoever in the decision. 25 years ago, my husband and I were looking for our first house. He had just graduated and still had student debt. I'd been practicing law and had $20K saved up for the down payment. Real estate agent only spoke to my husband, even if I asked the questions. In one house, we went to look at the basement and the guy said, "You don't want to go in there, it has spiders." I told my husband I wouldn't ever buy a house from him. Later, the guy ran for office and I told everyone the story, including a woman that called me randomly to promote his candidacy. Turns out she was his mother. It's a small thing, but indicative of his attitude towards the chicks. She made excuses about how awful spiders were, but I was clear that his behavior was dated and unacceptable, and that it cost him both the sale and our votes. This August, I bought a new truck and took my boyfriend with me. He's white and I'm Mexican. We arrived at the dealership and I asked about the Explorer they had front and center. Salesman comes over and is asking a bunch of questions to my boyfriend. Boyfriend told him it's for me. I was then ignored for the entire conversation. I got up and started looking at the truck. A Hispanic salesman comes and asks me if I need help. I was out there within 1.5 hours with keys in hand. Found my boyfriend with the other salesman. I looked at my boyfriend and said I bought the one I wanted. Manny G got me squared away. The look of utter disappointment and anger on the salesman's face was worth it. My boyfriend chuckled and said, "I told you she was the one buying. Manny, you were great." It happened to my mum when we went to look at colleges. The admissions guy opened by shaking my dad's hand, constantly directed questions at my dad, and would look to him for confirmation whenever my mum said something. My mum is de facto the money person of our family unit. She manages the family finances and investments and stuff, and was way more qualified to comment on things like student loans or expected contribution. When we left that meeting, she was absolutely furious that she had to basically fight the admissions person to have a normal conversation. My husband and I were buying a new mattress. It was a joint decision on the feel of it, but my decision for the price point and warranty and stuff because I was paying for it. In other words, all the stuff we actually needed the salesperson for. Salesperson was a fine guy, old-fashioned, not overtly rude, but he was definitely talking to my husband more than to me, the one with money to pay. I noticed, but I'm used to it. I was going to get my info and pay the man, whatever. But my husband, bless him, wandered away all floaty like he'd never seen a furniture store before. Weird, but okay. Then he came back and said, "Hey, can I have some money? I'm going to check out that insert dumb little decorative thing in the other part of the store." I was weirded out because I had never seen him care about a lamp enough to go examine it all on his own, and also we don't do that. But yeah, I said sure, and I handed him some cash. The salesman immediately stopped paying attention to my husband. Suddenly, in his mind, I was wearing all the pants. He started asking me what I did for a living, and I was able to negotiate for a slightly lower price. I love my husband so much. He knew exactly what he was doing. That is a husband who knew the assignment and understood what was up with the situation. You've got to respect someone who's completely okay with making himself appear less of a man in the eyes of some dink idiot just to let his wife have the attention she deserves. Who cares about the opinions of these salesmen anyway, after the purchase, I guess? My husband and I had our backyard completely dug up and re-landscaped when we bought our house. The landscaper was an older guy, probably around my dad's age, and my husband and I are pretty young to be homeowners, so I could kind of understand this guy's condescending attitude. When he came over the first time to do the estimate, he almost exclusively addressed my husband, even though I'd made it clear I was the one who was doing the designing and knew what I wanted done. When the work was done and I paid him, he kept looking behind me for my husband and almost didn't give me the aftercare instructions for the new sod, saying that he wanted to make sure it was done right, so he could just email them to my husband. I finally snapped. "Give me the damn piece of paper, Bruce. I'm the one who'll be home during the day to do the damn thing." I worked nights at the time. He reluctantly handed it over and called my husband the next day to make sure the lawn got watered. My husband told him, "You'll have to ask her, Bruce. She told you she'd do the damn thing," and he hung up. I had indeed done the damn thing. At work, I manage a few facility systems in our building. Think air handlers, water purification, stuff like that. I was meeting a new vendor, let's call him Pat, who was servicing one of the systems I was overseeing. Pat had already met the facilities engineer, also a man, so this coworker was introducing me to him. Instead of talking directly to me, Pat turned to my coworker after shaking my hand and asked him, "What does she do here?" A few weeks later, he had the unpleasant opportunity to learn that I'm the one who calls him when his company falls through and doesn't deliver. Needless to say, I was not overly polite about it when Pat failed to do his job. All of you writing to me after that post, you're making me laugh. Thank you for the stories and the get effed wishes for Pat. We were looking into replacing our roof. We found a metal roof company who was running a promotion, so I gave them a call and scheduled for someone to come out and give us a quote. I was able to answer all of his questions, but he refused to give me a quote without my husband present. with some sign before we leave for best price excuse, and was intent on driving back over the following day when my husband would be home. I called their main office shortly after he left and said I wasn't interested in any high-pressure sales tactics, I just wanted the quote, and if they wouldn't give that to me, the one who'd be paying for it, then to not bother coming back. I didn't see them again. The 3 other roofing companies I contacted had no problem dealing solely with me. In 2020 of all years, I had this with a new patio door. He walked in, looked me up and down, and outright asked if I had permission to make a decision on whether to accept their quote. When I said I had that power but wouldn't be making that decision until I'd spoken to a few more companies, he said he'd better come back when the man was around to sort this out. I told him he wasn't welcome back in my house and I'd take my business elsewhere. Their follow-up customer service call employee got a right earful when they rang a few days later to see if my husband and I had any more thoughts on the matter. Oh, believe me, I had some thoughts.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius?
I, a 38-year-old female, caught some hunters trespassing on my property. I wasn't rude to them at all, just waved from the other side of the field. The next day, they showed up at my house and one of them gestures towards the police car in the driveway and asks to speak to my husband about hunting in our woods. I was like, you can talk to him if you want, but that's my cruiser and this is my land, not his. They still insisted on getting permission from my husband. I was buying a new sports car. My husband and I walked into the dealership, and the sales guy walks up holding his hand out to shake my husband's hand and asks how he can help. Fine, no biggie. My husband says, she's buying, not me. Sales guy glances at me and says to my husband, well, it's not just her decision, right? We left, and I bought my new sports car elsewhere. Frickin' butthole. I was invited to a weekend away with the supplier to launch their new range. My husband went with me, and on the order day, the financial manager of the supplier came up to my husband and asked him what he thinks about the new range and what he's considering buying. My husband replied very dryly that he's only the plus one and that he must speak to me, seeing that I'm the one with the checkbook. We were buying a car for me, paying for the whole thing outright but financing the minimum amount because they ran a deal that got us $1,500 off if we financed through them. We just paid the whole note the next month. So of course we had to sit in the salesman's office for an inordinately long amount of time answering questions. The salesman, who was great in every other way because he was a hands-off, no-pressure guy, we had walked from several other places when they attempted to pressure us, he started asking my husband the questions. My husband pointed at me and said, I don't know, it's her car. The salesman said, of course, but we all know how that goes, right? And kept asking him. So what ended up happening, because we both wanted to get the paperwork signed and get the heck out of there, but we were also on the same wavelength about wondering how far we could go with this, was that the salesman would ask my husband the question, husband would blatantly turn to me and repeat the question, I'd answer him, and then he'd turn back to the salesman and repeat exactly what I'd said. The guy never got the idea that maybe he could, just ask me the questions. Then there was the car we bought for my husband a few years later, since we both put our names on the paperwork we both had to sign. The finance guy saw my last name was different and asked when we were getting married, and was confused when we said, 8 years ago? That first guy is something special. I mean, even if you do believe that your customers are making some sort of mistake based on the contents of their underwear, it's 100% clear that the decision is being made by one party rather than the one you're trying to talk to, and it's wasting everyone's time trying to force it to be otherwise. My wife and I are both physicians. She's very type A and particular. I'm much more relaxed and I go with the flow. We recently had a new home built, and since then I've done a lot in regards to landscaping and adding to the home. Finishing the basement, adding on a standby generator. The thing is, despite my wife usually being the one to reach out to contractors, and despite the fact that she's the one who wants things done in a specific way, and despite the fact that I usually refer them to her, they always try to contact me first, talk primarily to me when we're both present, and reach out to me when they have questions or need to let us know things. It is bizarre, like, I'm the guy in pajama pants and a sweatshirt playing the floor is lava with the kids. Does it look like I care what kind of finish is on the cabinets? Talk to my wife, we all know she's in charge. When I was buying my house, I took my boyfriend with me to the viewing, and the realtor was talking mostly to him and even ended up calling him with bids on a house. Yes, the house I purchased all on my own and is mine. I don't take myself too seriously and I'm not easy to upset or embarrass, so I don't really care. I was riding high on a wave of winning a bidding war. I think I should say I often find myself in similar situations where the salesperson looks at my boyfriend, yes, the same guy for 7 years and counting, for approval or answers, and my boyfriend always replies along the lines of, "Don't look at me, she's the boss, she's the one making the decision." And now that I'm thinking about it, I've never really had to tell anyone myself. He was always first to tell them. Maybe that's the reason why I never really thought much about it. So this one doesn't really involve any women, but a coworker of mine, an Indian contractor, who has a high-pitched voice when speaking English. He was on the phone with his insurance to ask why they hadn't made the payment to the garage fixing his car, and you could tell he was getting angrier and angrier at them when all of a sudden I heard him yell, "I am the husband!" Apparently the guy on the other line thought it was a good move to tell my coworker, "Can we talk with your husband about this? You don't seem to understand what we're saying." Our female coworkers were livid when they heard that and had a whole bunch of similar stories. I'm the husband, but whenever we have any kind of work done on our house, everyone constantly tries to make eye contact with me and pal around. My wife does all that stuff. I don't know anything about any of it. I literally spend the whole time redirecting people to deal with her. Sometimes I just excuse myself and have her fill me in on the details, which I don't care about or need to know later. My husband, bless his financially stable heart, always lived in nice apartments until we bought a house together. I always lived in the hood, in sketchy rental houses and apartments where calling the landlord or maintenance was usually more trouble than it was worth. So, I'm the de facto custodian, doing all the minor maintenance and arranging all of the big repairs. I enjoy that stuff. But yeah, as soon as a repair tech enters the house, they look for my husband. And every time I take them downstairs and quietly say, "The guy at the desk over there is my husband. He's doing call center work, setting appointments for the hospital. I'm your point of contact for this project. Please only talk to him if you're about to get loud." Sometimes I still get texts from my husband like, "They want to replace the pipes going from the hot water heater to the downstairs bathroom. Is that okay?" Grrr. The only exception is Mrs. Handyman. Exactly what it says on the tin. The person I use for small jobs that I can't do anymore. Her and I are cool. I have issues constantly when going out to eat with my boyfriend. They always put the bill down directly in front of him no matter what. Even when I reach across the table and grab it and put my card in, they almost always put the check back down in front of him after swiping the card. They'll often turn to him and thank him or tell him to have a great evening, or which copy to sign. It's infuriating. When I'd taken my appendix out, I asked for my doctor when doing the deed would be okay again. He turned to my husband and said, "Whenever you feel ready, you can begin relations again." I don't know if he was uncomfortable talking to me about it, or was deferring to what my husband would prefer. Either way, it was strange. Yeah, I always just sort of assumed that doctors are these highly educated and modern people, but this job that I'm doing right now has really proven to me time and time again that if there's one thing they're often behind on, it's gender equality. Bizarro. Semi-related, girlfriend and I were in a restaurant in Slovakia. The waiter, an older local man, comes over and directly addresses absolutely everything he has to say to me. Explains to me the 15-plus entries in exquisite detail, and then turns to my girlfriend and says the only words he said to her all night. "And the ladies, they like this," beckoning at one dish. Based on my girlfriend's face, I could tell it was A, bothering her immensely, and rightly so, and B, worse, that's exactly what she wanted on the menu before he came over. My wife and I, in Dubai, being the Middle East, they'd exclusively approach me, but the credit card was hers. Every damn time. This was my experience with my boyfriend in Vietnam. I sort of expected it, but still ended up really getting annoyed by it. No one ever spoke to me directly if we were together. At a restaurant, we were clearly done with our meal, and my boyfriend wanted to use the restroom. I looked over at the female servers and made eye contact while trying to signal them. They just stared at me back. I piled plates together. Nothing. A few minutes later, my boyfriend comes back and they approach him to ask if he wants anything else or the check. Nothing directed to me. Even when he and I tried the hotel spa, which in other countries are usually sexist in the other direction and cater towards women, they only asked, "Mr. So-and-so, how was everything?" Not a word to me. It took away from my enjoyment somewhat. Not me, but my mum. I'm not married anyway. My parents were looking to get solar panels and invited several people over to get their recommendations and get a quotation. This one salesperson kept only looking at my dad, only responding to his questions and not hers, and the quotation ended up being addressed only to my dad, not the both of them. My mum stood her ground and said that even if his offer was the lowest, they'd not be choosing him. My mum is very anti-confrontational, so I was really proud of her. Another time I was helping my mum book plane tickets online for both my parents. Even though she filled in her name first, the online system suggested that my dad would be the main booker. My mum booked her tickets elsewhere. trying to collect a parcel from the post office that was addressed to both me and my husband. I was told that my husband had come to collect it. I asked whether they meant both of us had to be there, and the response was, no, just him. Needless to say, I wasn't happy, and after a while arguing, they gave me the parcel. What was the most cringe moment at your D&D table? This one guy didn't understand the premise of organized play, so he spent 0 time helping with the mission and took 20 minutes to tell us about other awesome games he had played instead of playing the game in front of him that ended when the store closed. I DM'd for a group where one of the girls was convinced the entire game was for her enjoyment. She'd throw fits when the rest of the party didn't want to do what she did and constantly tried to split up from them. It eventually culminated in a very awkward temper tantrum when she refused to go with her party and ended up dying alone. Aw, mine's as vanilla as heck compared to some of these. It was the guy who smelled like cat pee. I was sat next to him. Why the frick is there always a cat pee guy at game shops? So back in high school, we had ourselves a D&D club. It consisted of myself and 5 friends. My senior year, we had a new kid join us who I'm going to call Nate. Nate was a very smart, very nerdy kid who was used to doing things mostly by the book. He had a campaign he wanted to DM, and our normal DM was happy to let him. Very early on in the campaign, another kid asked to join, who I'm going to call Joey. Joey was not the brightest. I don't know what was going on with him, but it just took him forever to get crap done. He began to roll up a character, but because he was frequently late, absent, and super slow, it took him probably a dozen sessions to finish. He had to change things constantly because we'd be higher level, or he didn't write it down, or he lost his sheet. Every single step of character creation required one of us to basically do it for him. Eventually, though, he finished his character, who was an arcane archer. Nate shoehorned him into the story by having us stumble upon him in the dungeon we were in. He was finally going to get to play with us. We left the room we found him in and proceeded to the next area. We opened a door and we were immediately faced with a beholder. It uses its death ray eye on a random party member, which happens to be Joey. Joey rolls a 3 on his saving throw and Joey dies within 2 minutes of playing, having done nothing but fail to roll a fortitude save. Now, all of us are thinking, Nate, for the love of God, just make something up that allows him to still be alive, even unconscious. Unfortunately, Nate isn't psychic, and as I said before, he's very by the book. Joey is dead and must roll a new character. It was so unbelievably awkward and painful. We still regret and talk about the mistake of not forcing Nate to let Joey live over 10 years later. The rules exist to help people have fun, not to destroy it. Whoopsie doodle. Well, that's the way the dice go sometimes. I do think that if you really wanted to get him in the game, you probably could have done more and done it earlier, but I guess that's the benefit of hindsight. Rest in peace, Joey's character. My good friend decided he wanted to do a sandbox campaign of his own making. We have the first session at my house, and one of the guys that showed up was a friend of a friend that neither of us knew very well. The session got started early, and already I was getting a dillweed vibe from this one guy. He's messing with other people's gear when they're asleep, calling out false alarms while on watch, and generally just being a jerk. One of the storylines involved investigating a murder. We arrived at the murder scene, and there was a charred corpse. We asked some questions, and the group wanted to leave. I picked an obvious action of investigating and searching the corpse. Among some clues, I find a +1 ring of defense. Being an unarmored monk, I keep it. Dillweed wants to roll for the loot. No, we wouldn't even have the ring if I hadn't decided to search the corpse, and it's an item I can use. Sorry, I know your wizard could also find it useful, but it's my find, and it's not like I found a magical double-headed battle axe and decided to keep it and not give it to the barbarian. So, nighttime comes, and I pass a note to the DM that I'm not sleeping during Dillweed's watch, but will feign sleep. Sure enough, during his watch, he tries to steal the ring off me. I'm starting to get angry at this point, so I put the ring in my prison wallet. The DM is getting amused and rules that since the ring is still technically equipped while in my keister, I still get the bonus. Dillweed is incensed. We make it back to town during a festival. We participated in some games, during which I jokingly made a pass at a lusty barmaid. Dillweed uses a glamour spell to make him appear later as the same barmaid and asks me to join her/him in the pantry. At this point, things are getting out of hand for a fun-filled D&D game as the glamoured wizard/barmaid falls to his or her knees and begins to go south of the border on me. During a perception check, I feel fingers roaming towards my butt and realize it's the frickin' wizard trying to get that frickin' ring. So I stunning striked him and he burning hands to me and crits. He takes me to 0 hit points, takes the ring and leaves me to bleed out in the pantry.
Didn't tell the party, they later found the body and lo and behold, Dillweed has a shiny new ring on. So, the party murdered him and buried me with the ring. That was the only session of that game. No one wanted to play after that and we never invited Dillweed back from then on. We've played many other sessions, but none stand out as that disturbing or weird. The DM would get drunk and start hitting on me, calling me by his sister's name the whole time. I guess I sort of look like her? This happened every time he got drunk, which was often. I played one session with a bunch of people who had never played before. Most of them were cool, but one guy who was playing a wizard discovered that some low-level spell he had, prestidigitation, allowed him to clean or soil objects up to a certain size. He spent the rest of the session trying to soil everyone and everything we encountered. It was funny the first couple of times, but it got annoying real fast. These kind of in-jokes can be so good in a long-term campaign. We had a bard who pretty much only knew mend as his spell, so at least once or twice per session, someone would rip or burn their clothes in a fight, and he'd pipe up excitedly, "Oh, I cast mend!" Lots of fun when it happened a couple of times. Not fun 20 times in one session. I saw a guy in his mid-20s cry and storm out of the room because his character got killed because he was doing something stupid. And he did get some crappy rolls, like a full-on child hissy fit over a D&D character death. He never wanted to play after that. First time playing, approximately 2003. We were in a cave, my turn came up, and I said in my best George W. Bush impersonation, "Let's search the cave for weapons of mass destruction." I was told to leave. I went back to playing Icewind Dale by myself. My DM is a bit loose on taking suggestions on things that don't impact the campaign but make us roleplay. My dwarf was attacking some random bandit, and he had to move under a beam and hit the bandit with his hammer. I rolled a 1. The DM said I ran under the beam but raised my hammer too early, hitting the beam and falling prone, to which the cleric replied, "And he pooped his pants." That was only the first time my dwarf crapped himself. Once a buddy of mine set me up on a date with a girl he knew. We hit it off and started dating. Turns out that buddy didn't expect us to hit it off, he was just trying to ice her a bit while he was off dating someone else. When he found out we were actually dating, he flipped out. He was my DM, the next session he tried to kill my character. The other players wouldn't have it, and it turned into a weird shouting match about betrayal and debaggery. Happened last week in my online game. Someone got upset after asking them to mute their mic while eating and stormed out, derailing the session. So, most of these are about people reacting to insane or at the very least unsociable behavior. This one flips it on its head slightly by being a very insane reaction to a very sociable request, so well done for that. I was deployed alone to an army unit I was unfamiliar with. I tried to make friends there, and one of the things the guys could do was play D&D. I'd never played, but I asked if I could and they set me up. So here I am, walking through an imaginary cave with literal and figurative strangers. I don't know these guys, but everyone seems level-headed. That is until I get to a cliff face that's too dark to see. My character has a torch, so I light it up, and the table frickin' explodes. I must have missed something because everyone turned on me. One guy got up and threw a chair. He frickin' rolls to douse the torch and calls me a jerk. I'm confused and I say sorry, and we carry on, but every move I made, they all gave me a distrustful look. It was a long deployment and tensions were high. It was my first and last time playing D&D. Some girl we were playing with insisted on having her character be the victim of the unspeakable act by one of the enemies. It was very uncomfortable. In one of our games, 2 of the player characters attempted to commit the unspeakable act on a third character. I say attempted, honestly they might have succeeded, I didn't bother to pay attention after a while. The third player was visibly uncomfortable with this, as was everyone else except the 2 players and the DM, who wouldn't stop the scene on account of, "They're just role-playing, guys," even though we'd literally begged him to intercede. I've never played with either of the 2 players or the DM again. Whenever someone just disobeys the rules they agreed to, it's so awkward to have that conversation. I used to DM and one of my stipulations was no evil player characters. I've just seen it lead to too much character in fighting in the past, and in-character fighting usually leads to real-life arguing, so no, just a rule I have when I DM. One guy said he agreed and then rolled up with the most evil, quote, neutral character I've ever seen. Sorry, but disguising yourself as someone and then cutting her face off while she's still alive so you can assume her identity is evil. I don't care what it says on your character alignment, Evan. There were a lot of evil things he did, like torturing, unprovoked murder of innocents, and other stuff, but this is where the rest of the party finally turned on him. He fought it for a while, but eventually he brought a new character the next session. I have a lot of stories, both about my players and the times I effed up, but I'll start with a short one. One of my players said, "I just don't understand why no one trusts me." I rounded on him. Sneaky Pete. You're in a Game of Thrones RPG, and you named your character Sneaky Pete. The last time I played D&D was Christmas of 2006, if I recall correctly. My old group hadn't played in a while, life had gone on, people had gotten jobs, got married, and had kids. None of us were in that place anymore where we could spend entire weekends having marathon RPG sessions like the old days. I decided it'd be fun to run a one-shot game, and came up with the idea to tell a simple story. It was more or less The Grinch Stole Christmas, but the Grinch was a band of goblins. I'd prepared a cool little dungeon crawl, NPCs with clues. It was just a neat little module meant to take a few hours to complete. Then I went online to Chessex and ordered a customized set of red and green dice for every player who came. The D6 said Merry Christmas 2006, with a little Christmas tree in it. All of our old players were invited, including significant others who were new to the group. I wanted everyone to have fun. It was just going to be this light-hearted, simple dungeon. Day of the game comes around, the party meets in the tavern, and a little kid character bursts in crying that their solstice celebration stuff was missing. And the party basically responds, "Huh, sucks to be you, kid, now let's get drunk." The drinking started up in real life. Players basically didn't give a damn about playing the game and kept saying they were trying to seduce people or do dumb stuff until I just gave up. I spent a lot of effort trying to do this fun little thing, and the group took a collective dump on it. It really bothered me at the time, and I basically gave up on D&D after that. Also was the last time some of those friends were invited to something I did. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I played while stationed on a ship, and because the group was co-ed, we had to host the game on the mess decks. There was a guy working the mess decks who had a huge crush on me and was super fundamentally Christian. One day when I got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the game, he stopped me on my way back, grabbed my hand, and prayed for my soul because I was playing, quote, a devil's game. I yanked my hand back and said, "I appreciate the concern, but never ever do that again," and I walked away. Thankfully, he didn't try it again and was only on TAD, the temporary assigned duty that every new sailor must complete. So he was sent back to his division a month later, and I never saw him again. You dodged a bullet there. An active duty fundamentalist would likely propose after about 6 seconds of eye contact, especially when a coworker made a joke about me being a virgin in front of him. I let it slip to one person after a few drinks and port, and 24 hours later, all 120 people in my division knew about it. After that, he did ask me if I was interested in a relationship, and I told him I was flattered, but we wouldn't be compatible at all. In fact, he never once asked me to pray with him or even preach to me until he saw me playing D&D. To be honest, I think he only did it because he was actually truly worried for my soul due to his upbringing, but left me alone when I asked him not to do that again, so I do have to give him some credit for that. A member of the party spent 20 minutes trying to seduce everything in the room. The DM wouldn't have it, and he wouldn't stop trying. Fricking bards. Look, I've got to say that this is pretty standard for any D&D group with a bard in the party. I don't know why the DM didn't expect that. Sincerely, the guy who loves playing as a bard. Our next commenter will also testify to the validity of this assertion. I seduced a dragon, so it doesn't always end up making things awkward. That dragon became my wife, and she helped me through the rest of the campaign. She died protecting me. I miss my dragon wife. A DM took a comedic moment too far and basically turned an entire adventure into a send-up of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. A mysterious alchemist character who was supposed to be a recurring villain practically turned into Dr. Frankenfurter. Jokes naturally creep into a campaign, but I've always felt when you start writing them in that it can be a bit too much. Months later, when that group had fizzled, I had an opportunity to view the DM's notes, and what that adventure could have been before the jokes was something awesome. This was more than 15 years ago. Climbing up the inside of a large grain silo at night, torches in hand, we ascended towards the treasure we thought was at the top. All of a sudden, there's a noise. "I draw both my swords," a player exclaims. "Are you sure?" the DM confirms. With a subtle nod from the players, suddenly the DM gets an excited look in his eye. Everyone roll a luck check, and I mean everyone. A cry of surprise goes around the table. What? Why? Everyone's exclaiming nearly in unison. Danver drew his swords. Yeah, and? Danver was holding a torch. If he draws his swords, I have to assume he dropped his torch in the silo full of very dry grain, which is now a roaring inferno. Only one of us survived. Playing Numenera, a role-playing game similar to D&D but taking place in the far distant future, where ancient tech is considered magic and there's all sorts of incomprehensible crap lying in trash heaps or buried in ruins. A player found this one thing, a one-time use blob of neon blue goop, that when spread on the stump of a severed appendage grows a bright blue replacement limb. You roll a d6 and on a 1 it's half the original size, and on a 6 twice the original size. Any other result and it's just normal. This is obviously meant to be a replacement for a lost arm or leg, with a little extra weirdness and risk to keep things interesting. So, naturally, the PC cuts off his own manhood, smeared the goo on the stump, and grew a foot-long, bright blue trouser monster. The Grape Dwarf, without the G. Okay, so this was my first session of D&D. It's sadly probably relevant that I was the only woman at the table playing the only female character, a human rogue. Due to plot reasons, we ended up taking a job to clear a mine of monsters. It became apparent that this wasn't going to go well when the dwarf, who had been quiet up until this point, started describing his combat actions with a little more relish than was strictly necessary. We ran into a small group of goblin civilians fleeing from us, and the dwarf announced that he was going to murder them all and have his way with their corpses, I think. It was a while ago. Anyway, the unspeakable act was involved. The paladin took issue with this and managed to hold him back, allowing the group, including the goblin children, to escape. The dwarf was unhappy with this. We proceeded to the lower levels of the mine, where it turned out there was a group of giant spiders, and naturally I managed to roll a critical 1, getting stuck in some webbing. The dwarf's player looked me dead in the eye and announced, "I have my way with her." Immediate silence followed. No one seemed to quite know what to say to this. The DM was the first to speak, saying, "Right, I'm going to say the last 5 minutes never happened." Everyone agreed that this was probably the best thing to do. The dwarf didn't like this, and after a few protests that he was just role-playing his character, he sulked in the corner for the rest of the session. I don't think he ever came back. It sure was an interesting first session. I still like D&D though. I mean, if you just sweep the online forums, this story is unfortunately far from unheard of, particularly with female players being the victim. Also common is the DM trying to get female players into compromising situations with orcs or some other nonsense. One particular story was really upsetting, as the girl in question had been the victim of that crime in real life before, so she really wasn't okay with that. She ended up leaving, and everyone was justifiably furious at the GM. If you're a GM and you try to incorporate that crap into your game without the meta consent of the players, you're a fricking scumbag. A player was being a jerk to my wife who was new to playing. It wasn't just like his and her characters not being compatible, he was outwardly doing and saying little things to make her mad in real life to where she didn't want to play anymore. I forgot what it was, but he said something and I, the DM, blew the F up at him. Most everyone else was outside smoking, but they heard and were like, "What the frick was that about?" Cue much silence and uncomfortableness. Oddly enough, he stopped and they're actually good friends now, so yelling works sometimes? Huh. Well, good on you for sticking up for her. I assume that you were prepared to have them stop being your friends for your wife's sake, but it seems like you got a nice bonus reward for taking your stand. Cool. I had this one player who would cheat all the damn time. He'd pre-roll dice until he got the number he wanted and then just pointed it after moving his hand like he'd just rolled when his turn came up. He refused to roll characters in front of everyone because anyone watching me is bad luck. He'd constantly change his mind and switch around things on the character several sessions in because he thought the guy wasn't min-maxed enough. He insisted on keeping his character sheet between sessions, and the character would mysteriously get stronger between every session. And that's ignoring common things like using information he couldn't possibly have, by buying the module we were playing through and memorizing it. Things like that. The time in question was a session we were playing Middle-earth role-playing, or some similar sounding system. It was a D100 system, so you'd roll 2 10-sided dice for just about everything. The DM's girlfriend, now wife, had joined for the first time, and she was a very nice person, bubbly and funny. She mostly understood the rules and played along. I noticed early on that when it was her turn, she'd roll her 2 10-sided dice, and whichever one was higher was the 10-sided dice for that roll, and the rest of the rolls that round. And next round she'd repeat the process, often using the 10s and 1s die to change between rounds. Small-time cheating, but I was used to so much worse and she was being moderately discreet about it at least. And then the cheater called her out. He pointed out she was ensuring she always got the highest roll to start her round, and it wasn't fair the DM was letting her cheat like that just because she was his girlfriend. She looked a little shocked at being caught and hurt at how he called her out. So, the rest of us started calling out the cheating we'd seen from him that session. Oh, you mean like last round when you rolled until you had 97 and then just pointed to it? Didn't you just get Firebolt? How could you have got so many points in it? Did you just erase the ones from Waterbolt and transfer them over? You know that isn't in the rules, right? It's funny. I don't remember you losing that magical staff with all of those bonuses. DM, can you check to see if that's really what the Wyram had last session? The game got a lot quieter in some portions of the table after that. Was building up a good relationship with an NPC over the past year, finally roleplayed the part where I asked her to marry me. The DM fell to pieces on me. Turns out he'd just learned a week prior his wife wanted a divorce. Ouch. Chunky dude with long blonde hair proceeded to unbutton his shirt, go in front of the fan and made a Batman pose with his shirt as the cape, coating the entire room in the smell of his BO. I've been trying to weasel my way out of going back ever since. I was the DM, and one player was playing as a barbarian, and he decided to try and intimidate some goblins, and rolled a natural 1. So, instead of intimidating them, I decided he seduced them. I and the others had a great laugh, but he was having none of it and slaughtered them. We then made him feel bad for killing the loves of his life. Maybe not exactly what you were going for, but it was fun. 2 players kept being wildly flirty and suggestive with their characters, which I guess could just be the name of this video, but anyway, he kept hitting on her and she was very open to it. It was very uncomfortable and creepy for the rest of us. She was the DM's wife, by the way. What was the best successful pickup you've ever seen? Okay, I don't know if this was the best way per se, but I definitely had something very random and very cool happen to me at a bar. Simply put, I was standing next to this really cute girl. I don't know if he saw her checking me out or something, but this guy comes up to us, makes eye contact with her, points at me and goes, "Man, that's a really cool blazer, don't you think?" She gives me a once-over and agrees. He gets his drink from the bar and leaves without saying another word. Instant attraction, dancing and hooking up happen. Thank you, random awesome wingman, wherever you are. I never got the chance to say that to you in person. Some buddies and I were at a bar just hanging out after work. There was this really pretty girl sitting at the bar with this guy next to her who was talking her ear off. I don't remember much about him, but he was wearing a baseball cap backwards. So one of us, we'll call him John, had just had kind of a depressing breakup and wanted to approach this girl, so we all got to talking about the best strategy. Someone, we'll call him Mark, suggests John slip her a note. What should it say? John says. Someone who we'll call Joe says, "This guy looks like a D-bag. I might be one too, but you'll never know unless you call me." Then phone number. We all laugh and John gets a napkin and starts writing. His writing looks like a little kid's, so we agree that the person with the best handwriting should actually write the note. I take the napkin and write it out, but John is already starting to get cold feet. He doesn't want to sit around awkwardly waiting to see if she calls or even reads the note. So we agree we'll all head for the door, he'll hang back a little and pass her the note before joining us on the walk to the subway. So we execute the plan. It goes perfectly. We see her check the note while Backwood's baseball cap is still chattering away. She laughs and slips it in her pocket without saying a thing to the guy, and she calls John before we're about a block away. They date for a few weeks. Turns out she'd recently had a rough breakup too, and it ends when they both kind of start feeling like it's getting too serious too soon. But I think they're still friends. A guy at my university also volunteered at a dog shelter. Beginning of each school year, he'd take a young puppy or dog, bring it with him to campus. He didn't have to hit on anyone. Girls literally flocked to him before he even walked through the doors. I once heard an old man say to a woman, "Back in my day, we'd have painted you on the side of an airplane." I feel jealous of being able to deploy that kind of generation-related pickup on someone. What the hell are us millennials meant to say? In my days, we'd have put you on a pog, or some other cheap plastic phenomenon from our 90s upbringing. I was at an upscale bar for happy hour with an old friend catching up. It was a piano bar and everyone was drinking martinis. Not real martinis, but apple and chocolate bullcrap. And wine, trying hard to be sophisticated. The piano was sitting empty before the hired player gets to work. Then this average-looking guy wanders up to the vacant piano and starts singing and playing some Norah Jones-esque song. And he is frickin' amazing. Seriously good. He sees some woman singing along and he calls her up for a duet. She reluctantly agrees. He continues playing and she's totally into it. Some Jedi mind control crap is happening in front of our eyes. Song ends, he gets a standing ovation and walks off with the woman on his arm. They spent the next 2 hours at the corner of the bar drinking and talking and laughing and eventually left together. He was an average 6 at best, but she was a borderline 9. Under any other circumstances, he would have likely struck out, but he nailed it. I went to college thousands of miles from home. First day in the dorm, I spent looking at a wall feeling sorry for myself. Second day, I went to a mall on a bus, but I hate malls, so I ended up in an arcade playing skee-ball. Yes, I'm that old. For those that don't know, it's a game where you win tickets, which you then trade in for useless crap. The crap I got was a stuffed sheep about the size of a small loaf of bread. I then went home and cried myself to sleep out of loneliness. The next day I woke up, classes still hadn't started, and I decided to meet people. On a whim, I take the stuffed sheep and tie a string to it. I went down to the common area and sat down near a wall and then threw the sheep out so it was just around the corner. The first girl walks up and looks at the sheep and looks at me. I pull the string. She gets a funny look on her face and says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm fishing for friends." She just laughed and walked off. Second girl who came by picked up the sheep and I pulled it out of her hands. She laughs and asks what I'm doing. I say I'm fishing for friends, and she says, "You should just try talking to them." I said, "What do you think we're doing?" We went to lunch, dated for a while, it was awesome. Funniest thing though, I married that first girl. In short, all you need is an excuse to start talking. For what it's worth, the whole sheep on a string thing was a conversation starter for a long time. Most of the people I became friends with would tell that story or ask me about it. I did it on a whim, but I think it was just the right amount of crazy. You know, cute, not too creepy. If I tried to tell all the stories that came about indirectly related to that damn sheep, you'd pretty much have to live 3 years of my life. Sorry. Once one of my friends walked up to a girl and casually asked, "Would you like to fill out a survey?" The girl accepted and he handed her his phone with the new contact screen open. My parents met when my mum was working at McDonald's in the drive-thru window. My dad pulled up and said, "Hey, this isn't what I ordered. I ordered a Big Mac, fries, and a date with you." Somehow that worked, and here I am. Watched a guy fall down skiing on the steepest part of a run, and he couldn't stop. Skis, poles, hat, and gloves go flying. As he's rolling and sliding, I notice he's about to do a bowling ball slam into a girl standing at the bottom. He spreads out his arms and legs and manages to stop, but lying face up, feet uphill, and she's just looking down at him like, what the frick? He says, "I've been trying to meet you all day." One of my close friends and I were playing pool in our dorm commons when this knockout brunette sat down with a few of her friends. Me and my friend both noticed she was glancing at him, but we continued to play pool. A half hour or so goes by and I ask him what he's doing the following day at 6, when I finished class. He turns and smiles at her before telling me, whatever she's doing at 6. Her jaw dropped and she started giggling. They dated for nearly a year after that. It was the smoothest thing I've ever seen to date. Met a gorgeous girl at the beginning of a New Year's Eve party. A few minutes before midnight, I saw her again and she gave me a frustrated frown. "Is something wrong?" I asked. "Last year's New Year's, I didn't have anyone to kiss at midnight, and I was really hoping this year would be different. I guess not. I'd been drinking, but not so much as to miss an opening like that. I took her in my arms and kissed her up to and through the countdown. At the time, it all seemed very spontaneous, but later I learned she'd been practicing that line for over an hour. Anyways, this August will be our 20th anniversary. For a few years in my mid-20s, I was the wing chick of my male friends. I'd swoop in to help them out when they were striking out on their own. As a female picking up another female for a male friend, my most successful pickup line started with, "Oh my god, I absolutely love your whatever they're wearing that stands out, like shoes, necklace, or bracelet." I'd then chat them up for about 5 minutes and give the signal, a scratch behind my ear or a thumb in my pocket, and my male friend would swoop in. I'd introduce them and tell a story about how this friend is so awesome, then excuse myself to the bathroom and go home. Usually, I'd wake up to a thank you text. My now husband had a bad reputation in college. The mutual friends through which we met called him Woman Poison because he was known for moving from lady to lady. Although I was interested in him, I only pursued serious relationships and turned him down for months. It wasn't that hard since I lived 2 hours away and had a career to focus on. One weekend I heard a knock on my door, and on my doorstep was a book he and I had discussed the last time we saw each other. He'd driven 2 hours, and was about 2 hours' drive back, just to leave me a physical copy of something we'd talked about. It totally won me over, signifying that he was willing to put time into the relationship. We dated 6 years and have been married for 4, and have a 1-year-old son. I have to be honest, you were still taking a risk, because love bombers do kind of stay in the fight and go to extreme marathonian efforts to win people over before they're successful and then lose interest. Luckily, this wasn't the case though. Happy 10 years! When I was 19, I worked at a CD store. Do you remember those? In the local mall with one of the finest women I've ever seen. She looked like a mix between Beyoncé and Missandei from Game of Thrones. Every day a new idiot would come in and try their luck with her, and they all failed. One after another, until this one guy. This guy was Swaggy P. Before there was a Swaggy P, pimp as all hell. Gold chains, Versace sunglasses, diamond earrings, the whole deal. He simply strolled up to her in what can only be described as the hardest, swaggiest of strolls, and simply asked, "What's up with you?" Smitten, she responded, "I don't know. What's up with you?" "Let me hold that number," he responded. "Alright," she said. The guy strolled out of the store, not saying a single other word to her. That was the exact moment when I realized I understood nothing. I got set up on a blind date. I was in this bar, music venue, and it had been a very stressful week. I'd just tried a jury trial, so I'm ready to relax. I'm drinking a beer and talking to my friend who was supposed to introduce me to this girl when this chick leans over and shushes me. Turns out the bar was supposed to be a very quiet, pay attention to the music kind of venue. My friend leans over and goes, "That's the girl, the one who just shushed me." Whatever, she is really pretty, so I shushed. A little while later, the music ended and we all headed to like a pool hall thing nearby. I was talking to the girl and wanted to compliment her good looks and bone structure, which was really nice. Somehow my compliment got stuck halfway between one thing and another, and it came out as, "You have a nice skull." Totally worked. We started dating and I married her 2 weeks ago. She still makes fun of me for complimenting her skull, too. When I was 5 years old, I literally hit the cutest little girl I'd ever seen with a stick while playing in the park near her house. She ran home and told her dad, who read me the riot act. 12 years later, I took her to senior prom, and another 11 years after that, I married her. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I don't remember getting hit on very smoothly many times. One time I can remember this college guy walked up to me trying to help me get a fundraiser or something, and after the conversation he said, "Hey, one more thing. Has anyone told you what's wrong with you today?" "No." "Good, because it's not a damn thing." It really made me smile. Hi there, can I offer you free yo-yo lessons? Years later, they're married with kids. I went to the movies on a day off, alone, and I saw a drop-dead gorgeous, way out of my league guy going in. I was a little high and single, and I'd snuck in Taco Bell, so I figured I'd try and share it with him and strike up a conversation. So I went down and sat a little bit too close to comfort. I said something about my taco and took a drink of his pop without asking. It went great. He swears to this day he went out with me because of my eyes and my inappropriateness. I'm still an oversharer and he's still out of my league. We've been married for 17 years and I have a huge crush on him. I once ran into a girl from my high school graduating class, 13 years after we graduated. When I said hi to her, I told her, "I didn't recognize you at first because I thought to myself, I couldn't have gone to high school with that girl, she's way too young." It made her day. I had a few Brazilian friends when I was in high school. I was hanging out at the mall with one of them on a Sunday night, just sitting at one of the tables at the edge of a food court. A few girls walked by together and he just stared at them with a smirk. One of them looked his way, but they kept walking. He said in his broken English, "Just watch, she knows." Know what? I had no idea. He kept watching the girls. Half a minute later, that girl looked over her shoulder and smiled at him. See? She knows. He keeps watching. A few more moments later, the girl laughs with her friends, leaves them and starts walking towards my friend. He gets up, meets her, they say a few things and start strolling the mall together. Me being a nerdy white kid, I was in awe of my Brazilian brother. Everyone on this topic is just the awkward person that was there. This is the internet. What were you expecting? My buddy saw a girl alone at the bar and happened to notice she was wearing a Star of David necklace. He walks up to her and says, "Hi, are you here with someone or are you just waiting for your messiah?" She threw a drink in his face. For some reason, I was expecting, "So, do you come here often?" I actually used Street Pass on the Nintendo 3DS to hit on a girl in school. I'd always noticed her from my programming class, and she always played her 3DS before and between classes. So, I used the private message function to make her aware of my existence. It went something along the lines of, "Hi, I'm X, I'm in programming." Next time we street passed, she responded with something like, "Oh, I know, hehehe." Next time in class, she invited me to her village in Animal Crossing. We've been dating for 2.5 years. Written in 2015. My college was very heavily male versus female, around 8 guys to every girl. I was resigned to pretty much never getting any action while I was going there. And for the first semester, that was indeed the case. A couple of months into the spring semester, I was invited to a keg party, and being broke as hell, that sounded great. Free beer, right? Not long after I got there, everyone decided to go see a movie across the street at the little theater. I just kind of mumbled that I'd guard the keg in case anyone else showed up, while the real reason was that I didn't have enough money to buy a ticket. A couple of hours later, everyone shows back up. I'd cleaned this guy's place up for him, out of boredom. A couple of the girls there commented on it, but otherwise the party resumed. It was around 11 p.m. and I was outside on the front porch smoking a cigarette. One of the girls there, who'd apparently just broken up with her current boyfriend, sat down beside me, asked for a light and said, "Look, in an hour you're going to come back to my place and we're going to F." Okay, sounds good. Not sure that would have worked if the roles were reversed. I think it depends on it not being threatening and how attracted they are to you, of course. Who's to say it wouldn't work? But I'm honestly going to say, don't try this, guys, unless you're 100% sure. My friend and this girl were talking. Girl tells the guy his joke was crap. The guy replies saying she looks like crap and immediately follows up with, "See, now we've both lied and we just look stupid." Damn, I can just imagine those terrifying few seconds where he needs to deliver the second line before she hits him or walks away. Back in my senior year, my buddy got really drunk at a club. Being the good friends that we are, we naturally convinced him that hitting on the two beautiful girls at the other side of the club would be the greatest idea ever. He agreed, and we told him that he should totally use the line, "Have you ever ridden the Oriental Express? Would you like to?" We're both Asian. This drunk mother effer with a crap-eating grin strolled up to the poor girls, grabbed both their hands and whispered into their ears. Both of them looked at each other in shock, then smiled and started talking to him. As the girl was whispering enthusiastically into his ear, my buddy puts a finger to her lips, turns around and walks back. Our jaws were on the floor. What happened? He just goes, "I got hungry. Let's get some Mickey D's." The entire night we were just so confused. I was in high school and there was this substitute teacher that was downright gorgeous. Everything a teenage boy could dream for, like straight out of one of those adult films you watch. She's subbing my class one day and she says, "I think I lost my phone. I can't find it." So I quickly go, "Oh, what's your number? I'll call it. 943-5573. Oh, wait, no, you think you're slick or something? I was so close. Needless to say, I never had a chance, phone number or not. This was early in the morning in the mostly empty Hub airport. What looked to be the entire Stanford's women's tennis team was chilling out waiting for their connection. A guy was walking around with his little brother and out of the blue smacks him on the back of the head saying, "Shut up, tennis players are hella hot." All 30 of them or so started laughing. Well played, my dude, well played. I've seen a lot of one-liners fail in the past, but just a week ago I saw a 13-year-old boy pull one off flawlessly. There happened to be two sets of kids where I work, all about the same age, 11 through 13 years old. The girls had walked past where the boys were sitting to go to the restroom, obviously the girls going all together. On their way back, a brave boy asked one of the girls to help him. Curious, she asked how. He asked her what type of phone she had because his was broken and he didn't know how to fix it. So she went over and was looking at it, and after not finding anything, she asked what was wrong with it. "It's broken because it doesn't have your number in it." The girl's dad happened to be passing by at the time, and he was laughing so hard I thought he was going to put his daughter's number in the kid's phone for her. Damn, I'm about to take tips on picking up women from a 13-year-old. This is what my life has come to. My 15-year-old nephew looked at my girlfriend's shoes and said, "I like your shoes." Then looked her dead in the eye and says, "You're so pretty." All I could think was, "Nice shoes, wanna F?" I was at a work function puffing on a cigarette. A girl I kind of knew saw me and said jokingly, "You know, smoking makes your little swimmers swim in circles." Then she went back to talking to her friends. A few minutes later, I noticed that she too had lit up a cigarette. So I said to her, "You know, smoking makes your little swimmers swim in circles." "I don't have any little swimmers," she says. "You want some?" I reply. She laughs. "Are you coming then?" And they left. They dated for several months afterwards. The best cut down while being hit on? My best bud was heavily flirting with this girl in a bar who was completely uninterested in him. After putting up with him for way too long, she suddenly spins around, looks him dead in the eyes, and asks quite loudly, "Do you remember your first down-under kiss?" Being completely surprised by the question and having a dozen sets of eyes on him at the bar, he timidly replies, Yes." She loudly asks, "Did you spit or swallow?" Tail between his legs, he quietly got up from the bar stool, admitted defeat, and crawled away in shame. Best one I've seen, I was sitting at a bar with a buddy of mine and there was an attractive woman on the other side of him. He says, "Watch this," and proceeds to turn to face her and introduce himself. They shake hands, and when their hands touched, he grabs her hand and says, "Hey, you have such small hands. My Johnson is going to look huge." I'd put my head down on the bar because I was almost crying laughing and fully expected him to get a good old slap for that one. No, she laughs and they proceed to flirt it up. Still amazed that worked. I think the success of this one depends on if you come off as super creepy or if you're funny enough to make it hilarious. Do not try this one at home, kids. I had a friend back in university who was socially behind the curve. He'd come off as creepy or just too abnormal, I guess. It made girls uneasy. But he was a decent, fun guy. Anyway, he had a huge crush on this one girl I was lab partners with, and I know she's single too. So I'm just coaching the guy to approach it halfway normally. I say next time he's with me and she's around, I'll just bring her into the conversation and just sort of flesh him out, big him up a little. And in an hour, when it's all a little more comfortable, I'll excuse myself for a minute, and he can casually see if she wants to go out sometime. Later that day, I'm at her house, finishing a report, and she gets a Facebook IM on her laptop. It's him, and without prior conversation, almost ever, the IM says, "Your chest is great," with the number 8 in the last word and a smiley face after. It didn't work this time, but I do admire his misguided courage. This one doesn't result in marriage or anything, but in terms of hitting on a girl, it's just so ballsy. I love it. A buddy of mine used to go to a girl at the bar, take her drink, slug it down in one go, then sit down and smile saying, "Hey, you look like you need a drink." Unbelievably, it worked sometimes. Got a buddy real drunk and told him to hit on a girl. When he blows it, we swoop in and apologize for our drunk friend, buy them a drink if required to, and boom, in there like swimwear. It worked 90% of the time, every time. What's the most ridiculous outfit you've seen someone wear at a funeral? Shortly before my nan passed away, she emailed me a picture of the new sandals she bought. She'd got 2 different colors, so the picture was her with one of each on. It was only fitting that we dressed her in those for her funeral. She'd laugh if she knew. My great-aunt wanted to be buried in her bathrobe. Her stepchildren honored that. To be fair, though, she wanted her clothes to be donated to a homeless shelter that she had volunteered at, and her jewelry to go to her kids. She wanted to be buried in her comfy bathrobe, since it would cover her and not take too much away from what others might need. Most of the residents of the homeless shelter attended her funeral, more than half wearing an article of her former clothing. My grandma wanted to be buried in powder blue pajamas because she, quote, wanted to be comfortable. So that's exactly what we did, and she looked great. My grandpa was buried wearing blue pajamas and a sleeping cap. My great-grandmother worked as a clown. Like, she attended clown college and everything. She loved her job very much. She was buried dressed as a clown with the makeup and everything. That's a zombie that I would lose it over. Imagine archaeologists finding that 2,000 years from now. I've never thought about the zombie or archaeology thing, but both of those are hilarious to think about. I'd crap myself if I saw a clown zombie. Also, yes, it was open casket. My great-aunt was buried in her 100 jazzercise classes taken t-shirt. She was super frickin' proud of it, so it was fitting. I love that woman. In my grandpa's case, the outfit was his birthday suit and a treasured blanket. When my grandpa died a few years ago, it was his wish that he'd be buried undressed and wrapped in his favorite blanket, a blanket that my grandma had handmade for him decades ago. Thankfully, the funeral home was very understanding of his wishes and had him in the casket in the buck, with the blanket around him for his viewing and subsequent burial. My mum was a casual lady who excelled at dog rescue. When she passed, it didn't make sense to put her in a dress or suit, so she was cremated in her favorite comfy jeans and a "You'll Never Walk Alone" dog rescue t-shirt. I sincerely hope that there were as many good canine boys and girls as possible at that funeral, if only because it seems like something that would make her sad event a little bit cuter. My grandma was clothed, but the outfit she was wearing was one she had not fit into for years until, ironically, she got sick. It actually cheered her up knowing that she had lost enough weight to wear it, so that's what we buried her in. We put a bottle of Imodium in my dad's pocket just in case he got the runs in the afterlife. Funeral director thought we were bonkers. I thought, who wants to live in an eternity stuck in a box filled with diarrhea? My husband's uncle was a very famous clown. Although he wasn't buried in his clown suit, clowns came from across the tri-state area in dress to pay their respects. It was the strangest but most beautiful thing I've ever seen. There were probably over 100 clowns at his funeral.
but yet there was only one car in the parking lot. My grandmother had a deck of cards for more than 60 years. They were frayed, stained, and you could barely read them. She refused to use any of the nice, fancy new cards we gave her and never shared the story as to why they were so important to her. She was buried with those cards. It seemed like such a tender and intimate moment to place them next to her, as if they were a huge token of her memories that were never meant to be shared. It's been 20 years, and I still miss her beyond words. Not ridiculous so much as weird from the outside. My grandfather was buried with a folded-up bunch of paper towels stuffed up his sleeve. He was one of those guys who always had something for spills and runny noses, and he always had a paper towel or tissues with him. Turns out he'd started keeping them in his sleeves when he was younger, just in case he ever needed them, and with 5 kids and 11 grandkids, he always needed them. When he died, his sons decided it would be very fitting if he had some paper towels with him, so that's how he was during his viewing and service. Fancy nightdress and a matching robe. This 70-plus-year-old lady wanted to be buried in this glamorous vintage nightdress set that you'd see in an old movie, or maybe it was her husband's preference. It had feather accents and matching kitten heel slipper things. She was also buried in her costume jewelry. Her regular hairdresser came in to do her hair and cried the entire time. I think she had been sick for a while, so the nightdress fit loosely. So we used double-sided tape and a few simple stitches to the nightdress to try to keep everything where it should go. It was a weird request, but I thought it was interesting, and to the staff's surprise, her family seemed to expect this as something totally normal. It was pretty cool. I buried my late husband in a Superman t-shirt and his favorite camo pants and boots. He wore his camos when he went to chemotherapy. He called them his battle pants. I put in a poker chip from one of his mates, his BlackBerry, and a toy from our daughter. I always wondered what the archaeologists would make of it if he was ever exhumed. Archaeologist here, I'm pretty sure you accidentally started a trend in the academia of centuries from now, where people write about techno-religious iconography and rituals involving metal bricks, which were used to simulate communication with the ancestors. My grandpa passed away last week, and we had his visitation and funeral on the Thursday and Friday, respectively. At the funeral home, the director asked when the last time he'd worn a suit was. We said it was probably for my grandma's funeral 6 months before. Apparently, there were cookies in the pocket of the pants. Completely appropriate, given my grandpa was a child at heart who loved ice cream, cookies, and candy. We decided to leave the cookies there. My mum was an avid bridge player. Our sweet funeral director researched a good winning hand in bridge. Mum was cremated holding her winning hand. My dad was a firefighter. He died of lung cancer when I was 21. We decided to cremate him in his formal uniform, but my mum came out in front of the house full of family and friends with his large collection of superhero boxes and said, "So, the Flash or the Hulk?" It was a really great moment to lighten the mood and brought his goofier side right back to life. And we chose the Flash, by the way. Buried in a Walking Dead t-shirt, the family had a great sense of humor. I get that funerals are typically a somber scenario, but if people aren't laughing and joking at mine, I'll be disappointed. My grandmother, she was the kind of woman who wore shoulder pads in almost everything, including t-shirts. My grandfather, a very practical and straightforward man, wanted to dress her in something that she loved to wear all the time, and always got tons of compliments on. I should also mention that he is red-green colorblind. Bright colors don't stand out as much to him. It was a sleeveless button-up blouse that was covered in the good old stars and stripes. After some discussion with the rest of the family, we ended up choosing her second favorite outfit. A very tasteful silver dress, with shoulder pads, of course. As a side note, the casket was lilac purple. That, Papa would not budge on. My uncle was buried in a Santa Claus outfit, and I can say that I'm scorned forever for Christmas. All I could think of was a Santa Claus zombie chasing people. It's one of my requests to have my shoes tied together when I'm buried. If my corpse ends up coming back to zombie-terrorized society, I want people to have every advantage against my reanimated remains. There are a lot of zombie-related answers in this group, and honestly, the narrator is loving it. It may well inspire me to change my last will and testament so that in the unlikely event of Zed Day, I'm inexplicably shambling around Europe in a full disco outfit complete with the fishbowl shoes containing little zombified guppies. Perfect. When my dad died, we sent his favorite Crocs for his feet. They were Ohio State University merch, and he often wore them to church to preach in. Yes, you heard that right. My dad was a pastor who preached in Ohio State University Crocs. He also had a hideous shirt that my mum tucked into the casket with him. My mum had tried to get rid of it several times, but my dad had a sixth sense and always rescued it from the donation pile. She didn't bury him in it because it didn't fit him anymore, but she gladly let him take it with him. So I'm going to offer some unsolicited advice. There is no right or wrong way to grieve. Let yourself feel all the feelings. It's okay to laugh, cry, rail at God if that's your thing. Keep all of their belongings or give them all away. It's okay to miss them at the big life events and the small ones. It's okay to have weird thoughts or do strange things at their funeral. My dad did a lot of funerals, and over the years he had some rather stupid ideas of things he wanted that we didn't do. Examples included propping him up beside the pulpit so he could preach at his own funeral, having a cheese or veggie tray on his chest so people could have a snack as they went through the receiving line. Seriously, Dad, what the frick? My personal favorite was putting him in the casket upside down with a rose between his butt cheeks and a note, "Kiss my rosy cheeks goodbye." It's okay to visit their graves or not to. I will tell you that I've never visited my dad's grave because he wouldn't have wanted that. Be well, everyone. I sang at a funeral where the man wanted to be buried with his bar stool from a local pub. He had been a regular for years and the pub acquiesced. It was weird to sing to a bar stool at the graveside portion of the funeral. As I remember, it had red leather inset on the seat. My father was buried in his wetsuit. He loved to water ski and would go every weekend. I even had a matching one when I was a baby. My first husband was an avid fisherman. His parents insisted that he be buried in a suit, but his favorite outfit was a pair of khaki shorts and a yellow Base Pro t-shirt. I asked the funeral director to put that outfit underneath the suit, and no one was the wiser. I put a couple of his favorite lures and his most well-loved pipe in his pocket as well. I don't doubt for a moment that the crematorium disposed of those items, but at least I knew I did right by him. I've never had a moment of regret about this decision either. It's what he would have wanted. I appreciate the people from the funeral industries who've written into me with their responses as well. I didn't think they stripped his body, but I knew they wouldn't leave his wedding ring on, so I think I just assumed they emptied his pockets as well. Kind of weird to assume now that I think about it. Good to know he probably got to keep it all.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
My grandmother was raised Seventh-day Adventist and believed in the resurrection. When my grandfather died, I laid out his best clothes and his dress cowboy boots, which he loved. My grandma hated those boots, so she said, "Oh no, they don't bury people with shoes on." So I acquiesced and my grandpa went into the ground in his socks. I was sure she was worried she'd have to spend eternity with him in those boots. Grandma was a lovely woman and only put her foot down twice in more than 50 years of marriage. Grandpa's chewing tobacco habit and those boots. We buried her in her dancing shoes. I don't know if this counts, but it contains a wedding dress and basically someone's ashes in it, so I'm just gonna say it. When my great-grandmother died, her wish was to be buried with her husband who had been cremated about 14 years earlier. But it's illegal here to bury two people in one grave unless it's asked like years before they die. So my grandmother had this plan. She had a pillow made of great-grandmother's wedding dress, and she put great-grandfather's ashes into the pillow, and when we said our last farewells, we asked the funeral director if we could change the original pillow for this one. He agreed, and we were trying so hard not to laugh because we were smuggling my great-grandfather, who was dressed in a wedding dress, into the coffin illegally, and I swear I could hear great-grandmother laugh through the wind. But that's a story for another time. Her funeral was a whole other wild story. An old lady spent 40-odd years in her local church choir, so the family asked the choir if they could have her choir robe to bury her in, as it meant more to her than any of her ordinary clothes. Not a funeral home employee, but an elderly friend of mine who was obsessed with space aliens demanded to be laid out in his Star Trek uniform. He looked good. Everyone understood and they were cool with it. His widow was fiercely protective of him. He left me one of his 5 Star Trek communication devices. High quality, too. Not a funeral home, but I went to a family friend's funeral where the guy was just shirtless. He had a blanket covering up his chest, so I'm not sure if he had pants. My father always used to tell me he wanted his dead body stuffed and placed in the lobby of an adult movie theater. As a kid, I didn't understand what was funny about this, and now he denies he ever said it. My grandpa was buried in bib overalls and a plaid shirt. He was just a simple farmer, and that's how he wanted to be seen for the last time. My grandma was horribly embarrassed by the fact that she had dentures. We made absolutely sure they were firmly in place when she was buried. My dad told the funeral director that if she was buried without her teeth, she'd haunt us all.
My grandfather always wore those dicky jumpsuits. When he passed, all the grandkids wanted to bury him in his favorite one, which was light blue, but my grandmother quickly put a stop to that. My uncle was cremated in a shirt with a bunch of flames on it. It wasn't planned, though. Hey, I don't see what the problem is. I'll bet your uncle looked hot as hell in that outfit. My dad went with a Mars bar and birthday cards. He died in a palliative care unit, and someone in the family bought a Mars bar for a snack but forgot about it. After Dad died, we were given a bag with his stuff in it. We emptied the bag but filled it up again with clothes that we wanted him buried in and gave the bag to the undertaker. We went to see him a few days later, which was his birthday, and there he was with the Mars bar in his hands. It had been at the bottom of the bag, and the undertaker thought there was a sentimental reason for the Mars bar. We thought it was very funny, and we just let my dad go with his last ever chocolate bar. One of my medieval LARP, or live-action roleplay, teammates lost his wife when they were both in their 50s. They were very passionate players. He buried her in a beautiful white dress decorated with pearls and rhinestone, a veil, a crown similar to King Elrond's. We could see her in the small chapel of the hospital. She was gorgeous. Her husband held a speech as he used to do during LARP sessions when we mourned a dead hero, and at a certain point we shouted her name 10 times. 50 of us. It was heartwarming and surreal. The funeral mass was on the next day. It was fine. Somehow treating her as one of our characters helped him to accept her death. He still plays and wears a medallion with her portrait during game sessions. I'd like to add some details to this story. They had no kids and no close relatives, only some slightly related cousins that they hadn't met in the last decade, and his old mum living next door. Players were more than friends. We were their family. She died of a stroke, completely unexpected. We knew it hours later, so as soon as news spread, we rushed to the hospital. Many of us didn't even change clothes. They came in jeans and sweater or in office suits. For many of us, it was our first funeral we'd attended with friends. Our families weren't involved. Her family members were surprised to see a mixed crowd of younger people in their 20s and 30s besides older players, dressed more or less elegantly. We were surprised to see her dressed like a queen. She was beautiful. Beside the hospital there was a small chapel. Hospital staff allow people to see the deceased person in open casket before the mass. That's always with a closed casket. We couldn't wear our full gear. That would have been even more epic. So her husband gathered us in the chapel and held a speech. We were enough to fill it up. He spoke off the cuff. It was a beautiful speech, completely unplanned, about their friendship, love, and remembrance. The same kind of words he'd had for our deceased heroes at LARPing. He had words for hope for himself. At last, he asked us to stand up and shout her name 10 times, as loud as we could. Her name echoed in the chapel, and in that moment, reality hit us really hard. We all cried. We saw grown-up men with long hair and beards crying like babies. Hospital staff asked us to stop as it was disrespectful, and family members badmouthed us for making a pantomime out of a funeral. We weren't playing. It was our way to express sorrow. Funeral mass was pretty quiet. I'm grateful that the relatives avoided useless speeches. I want to remember my friend and my high priestess like this. Right now I can't stop crying. Her husband is writing a fantasy novel about our adventures. It's not in English, but we want to translate it. Now he's 60, and after a couple of rough years he's started feeling better. He still plays and goes out with player friends. LARP saved his life. When my husband passed away, I put a roll of Mary J. and a lighter in his pocket. Strangely, he passed away on April 20th, 2016. He loved the ganja. A friend of mine passed away in college due to a substance habit. She was super into tabletop gaming, Doctor Who, and anime. Her friends and family decided that the best way to honor her would be a cosplay funeral. So she was dressed in the steampunk Victorian dress that she'd had before she'd passed away. Only about a third of the people dressed in cosplay. I'll admit I took the lazy route by dressing up as David Tennant Doctor Who, because the costume was literally just a blue suit which I already owned. It was really nice to see all the DMs line up and put her character sheet into her coffin with her. I made sure to give her a complete set of dice too. A cosplay funeral sounds fantastic, but honestly the DMs giving her back her character sheets and you giving her a full set of dice brought a tear to my eye. I love D&D and that's just a beautiful gesture. Ex-Mormon here. Mormons are buried in their temple clothes, so some funeral directors are a little surprised to see white pants, white shirt, and green aprons. And the white hats. I almost forgot the white hats. When my parents died, my sister and I had to choose the clothes. Mum's was a simple blue dress she wore to church. My dad always wore cowboy boots. We chose his blue suit, but couldn't find his black boots. We sent the brown ones, but I was bothered about it. I found the black ones before the first viewing and had them changed out. My father would never have worn brown boots with his navy blue suit. He was wearing a teddy, but a masculine teddy. I've had a nasty old pair of sunglasses with a spiral pattern for about 15 years now. I got them at the thrift store. They used to have a Tricks logo on the side, so I think they were like a prize you could mail in at some point. Anyway, I love these glasses. In college, I was known as the guy with the sunglasses to the point where they interviewed me for the April Fool's edition of the college paper. At this point, they feel like a part of me and I want to be buried wearing them. From far away in some lights, it kind of looks like bug eyes staring back at you because of the wear, and I can imagine how ridiculous it would look to see me in a coffin wearing them. When my grandmother passed away, I put a skein of yarn and her knitting needles with her. When her husband, my grandpa, died, I put his favorite whiskey and a shot glass in his pocket. When my dad died, I put peach pits in his hands. He told me when I was little to make sure I did it so he could grow into a peach tree and feed us. I never forgot. I kept my promise. A clown suit. I kid you not. Did they play Pop Goes the Weasel as the casket was lowered? Look, I'm just going to come out and say it. The sheer number of people buried in clown suits or with clown-related funerals is frankly mind-blowing. I make a lot of these videos and often they pass out of my memory shortly afterwards, but I don't think I'm ever going to forget how many people went to the grave in their Bozo the Clown rigs. Me and my mums had a good laugh. It was still really sad when my great-grandpa was buried in his clown suit because he requested that he'd be buried in it or hate everyone while watching from heaven. My brother was buried in an OSU, Oklahoma State, hoodie with his favorite pair of jeans, wearing a pair of Oakleys I had that he really liked. Well, this was more of a little casket decoration thing. So when my great-uncle died, we all put a stuffed animal in the casket with him that had red on it, and my family put a peacock in there. We also put a pair of red suspenders in there with him. My uncle was a long-time Civil War reenactor and historian. He was cremated in his Confederate cavalry uniform and the remains buried with the uniform's hat and canteen. My uncle was in the closet trans and was done up full drag queen style. It was amazing. One more FU to her awful family. What's it like to be the survivor of a disaster event? Since I live in Chile, I'm used to earthquakes. Perhaps in some countries, an earthquake of magnitude 6 on the Richter scale is something big, but here it's kind of normal. But the one I'll never forget is the 8.8 earthquake on the Richter scale that happened in Santiago of Chile. Let me explain a bit. I'm a native of the northern region of the country, where most of the earthquakes happen, so the constructions are especially resistant against earthquakes. Santiago is not like that, since they rarely get too much movement. Anyway, I was going to a concert there, and I was staying in a friend's apartment for the week I was there. It was the 27th of February 2010, 3:33 a.m. I was chilling with my friend and some of his pals when suddenly all of the lights went down. We thought that maybe the building got a malfunction. Then, looking through the large windows, we saw all of the city going completely dark. I don't know if you guys have been in an apartment building during a huge earthquake, but I'd describe it as being akin to being on top of a wet noodle that moves one side to another constantly. The first thing that got to my head is to stay away from the large windows and to get under the table. I happened to be in a very calm mindset in this situation, apparently. While my friend and his mates were screaming like hell, I tried to keep them calm by telling them the usual. Everything's going to be okay, earthquakes are usually short, so we just need to wait in safety. Holy crap, was I wrong. The earthquake, magnified by the swaying of the building, was 3 minutes long. The longest 3 frickin' minutes of my life. When it finished, I was relieved. I checked if everyone was okay, and they were, just scared as all heck. I told my friend Ben that we needed to get the hell out of there. Ben suggested that we pack a backpack with some supplies. When he was getting his backpack, his friends just ran out of the place to their families. He told them to stop, that we needed to stay cool and together, but their need to see their families was greater, and I do kind of understand that. Ben finished packing and we started running to the emergency stairs. We were making our way out using cell phones to illuminate the hallway, when suddenly Ben stops me from nowhere. I ask him what's wrong and he just replies, "Look," and points the flash of the phone to the floor. It was just like the movies. The building was split in half. I swore loudly and then he fell to his knees while looking at the bottom of the building. His friends, in the rush to see their families, didn't see that the building was split and fell down the crack. We expected the worst. Ben started crying and I was in shock. Just 30 minutes ago we had been hanging out with them, laughing, and now we can just see their bodies down there. An infinity of screams and cries created the atmosphere of our night. We made our way down through the holes in the building. While doing so, we tried to help as many people as we could, some trapped by giant pieces of concrete and some just dead. I saw so many images that will haunt me forever. We got to the place where Ben's friends fell, and thanks to I don't know who, they were still alive, with many broken bones, but alive. We took them one by one to the road and waited for help from the police, military, medics or fire people. I can't believe we all made it. I watched and experienced two sides of people that day, the ones that try everything to help others in any way possible, and on the other side the ones that take advantage of the situation just to steal stuff from destroyed homes. So that's my story. It's actually way longer, but I didn't want to make it tedious to read. Thanks for reading my story. My god, that was far more horrifying than I was expecting, even with the topic of this particular video. I can't imagine just realizing that you were on the edge of a chasm. The implication that your tall building is split completely in half would honestly paralyze me. When I was 9, we were traveling from our cabin back to town with an open boat. This was right before Easter, about a 45-minute trip. The seas were rough and the boat had a built-in flaw that caused it to break into two pieces due to the pounding of the waves. I sat face towards the back, so I didn't see it break at first, just suddenly had water up to my waist. When I turned around, the nose was floating a couple of meters away from the boat. My mum's husband at the time just said, "Jump," and so we did, into the black 2-degree water of the North Sea, as far away from the boat as possible. This was by far the scariest moment. Her husband managed to launch 2 emergency rockets before the boat vanished below him. He was a very poor swimmer, and even though we tried to hold on to him, he got away from us due to the large waves constantly covering us. After that, it was about 10 minutes of trying to swim to shore, which was about 400 meters away, before realizing we were never going to make it. After that, we basically dodged waves and made bad taste jokes. We saw people on the shore, cars stopped on the highway. The last thing I remember before blacking out is a boat approaching. Then I woke up in the hospital, basically thrashing around from the cramps of my body trying to warm up. Apparently, I had a temperature of 27 degrees when they brought me in. My mum was awake the whole time. She lost control of her limbs right after I blacked out and gripped a rope from my life vest in her teeth so I wouldn't float away. Even though this was a scary story, there were some awesome elements to it. An old fisherman in the house by the shore saw the whole thing. He was desperately trying to get a hold of rescue services, but no one was where they were supposed to be. His wife, having lost both her previous husbands and also a son at sea, had some kind of health issue while watching us swim around. So he had to take care of her while trying to get us help. The most awesome part of the story is how we got rescued. One of my mum's husband's friends got a call about what was happening. He got in a boat with his 8-month pregnant wife and went full speed to our location. The boat he had was not designed for high seas. It was a summer kind of cabin cruiser, so he had to steer it towards the waves at all times. His wife then proceeded to pull 3 fully clothed people up to safety, including an unconscious me. If anyone has ever tried to pull someone out of the water, you know how difficult it is. We all survived. I was totally fine, aside from my family jewels swelling up to 3 times the normal size for a couple of days. My mum tore a bunch of stuff in her back, and the husband swallowed about 4 liters of salt water and was sick for a week. In short, boat broke in 2, cold water, amazing rescue. My husband's parents lived on a boat off the coast of Asia for a while about 20-something years ago. Well, when my mother-in-law was about 8 months pregnant with my brother-in-law, the boat sank in the middle of the ocean. It happened slowly over the course of a day or so the couple sent out a bunch of distress calls, packed the important things and camped out in the lifeboat while the ship sank. They saved a few nice things for their eventual rescuers, a nice canned ham and a good bottle of wine. Well, they were eventually picked up by the Exxon Valdez, which was fortunate. Unfortunately, at the time, the crew was entirely Muslim, and as such, the canned ham and nice wine weren't ideal gifts. I was pilot in command of a small Cessna, taking my dad out for his first sightseeing ride on an October evening. He'd taken the back seat in one of my training sessions before, but this time was the first time the two of us were alone together and at liberty to go as we pleased. After a while, I noticed that the engine had lost 300 RPM. I pushed the throttle to max and no change. Turned on the carb heat, if I remember correctly, and nope, still nothing. I began heading back to the airport. But as the power slowly diminished, I knew we wouldn't make it back by a long shot. Conclusion, I had to get that bird down somewhere. It was at nighttime. Beneath me were patches of fields or forest, and I couldn't tell which was which in the evening darkness. I opted for the only well-lit place in the circumstances, the freeway. I made my emergency call, got a response, told my dad what I was about to do, and proceeded to fly the airplane. By the time I was on my so-called final approach, the engine was puttering along at a measly 1000 RPM despite a full open throttle. All I had to do was follow a slight bend in the freeway to the left, just past a viaduct, and I'd have 3 open lanes of road on which to land, and probably surprise a few drivers along the way. Huge black bars suddenly showed up in my field of vision, followed by bright white flashes of light. The aircraft had just struck high-voltage power lines. By the time I was done screaming, the aircraft had rolled down in a side ditch and slammed itself against a fence. Ambulances arrived within a minute, pulled my dad and I out and raced us to the hospital. I awoke in a dimly lit hospital room. Dimly lit because of the citywide power failure that I'd just caused, which I realized once all the other lights turned on late at night and the nurses cheered at getting power back. Somehow, I didn't break anything, although I had a sore and stiff body for a few weeks, and my back became prone to locking for the next several years. My father had a few broken bones but was judged stable and set to recover. However, he suddenly and unexpectedly succumbed to his wounds a week later. I haven't piloted an aircraft since, and I have no desire to. I can be a passenger in an airliner or commercial small aircraft without a problem, but my days of flying pilot are over. Well, can't blame you for that one. My condolences. But color me surprised that both of you even survived the initial impact, let alone one of you carrying on more or less unscathed for the rest of their life. I kind of assumed that hitting those things at plane speed would be an instant end to things. Woof. I was stuck in a bushfire here in Australia. My significant other, myself, and our infant son were in the car evacuating on the only road out of our small town. We'd got very little warning as the fire moved so quickly. Fire was coming on the right side of the road, there was smoke everywhere, we could hardly see. My significant other was driving and luckily saw the truck in front of us and stopped just in time before hitting it. A semi-trailer truck, an 18-wheeler, had jackknifed in the road and was just blocking the way. We couldn't see if anyone was in the truck, and I was going to get out and check, but the fire was now at the roadside on our right, and years of fire safety education had taught me you stay in the car. We had a UHF radio in the car, so I tried to contact the truck on that with no response. The fire started to blow across the road and ignite the bush to our left. There were embers raining down on the car, we just stared at them bouncing off the bonnet. I saw a flashing red glow in the smoke beyond the truck, and it took a minute or so to work out what I was seeing. It was a fire service truck. I had to fight every bit of instinct I had in me, which was screaming to go grab my baby, hide him inside my clothes, and run towards the red lights. I doubt I'd have made it. Fire was literally blowing around in front of us, but damn if that wasn't the strongest instinct I've ever felt. I just sat there in the car, repeating over and over to myself, "Stay in the car, stay in the car." My partner managed to contact the fireys on the UHF to alert them to our presence. They sprayed water over us while a secondary truck drove through the burning scrub around the big truck to reach us, and then the rest was all a blur, being transferred to their truck and driving out there, watching the bushfire raging behind us. I saw the news in the hospital where they reported 2 deceased people found in that same semi-truck. Volunteer firefighters saved our lives. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was in a plane crash in 2013. 3 friends and I had taken a Cessna to interior BC for the long weekend. One of those friends had their private pilot's license. The day we were heading home, it was quite hot, and the plane was, according to investigators, overloaded and overfueled for the heat and altitude. Once we reached 2,000 feet above takeoff, we began losing airspeed. The pilot panicked and did some steep turns in an attempt to gain some speed, but it nearly scrubbed all of our altitude pretty much instantly. Now at a few hundred feet and descending rapidly, the pilot took aim at a farmer's field. They managed to level us out at around tree height, but we were quickly running out of field. Maybe 100 or so meters before the end of the field, they dropped the plane to the ground, the nose dug in, and we flipped end for end. I ended up walking away essentially unscathed, minor bruising from the seatbelt and some small scratches. The pilot had a pretty good cut and bashed their knee up against the dashboard. The front passenger, my girlfriend, took pretty much the brunt of it all. Her seat ripped off the floor, smashing her against the roof. It shredded the ligaments on the side of her neck, compressed her spine, and concussed her badly. The ligaments were bad and are still causing issues now, 5 years later. But the post-concussion issues were far worse. Watching someone you love lose the ability to read, remember what they had for breakfast, or whether or not they had breakfast, or maintain any semblance of emotional stability, or even do something like play a board game to pass the time, because learning and remembering the rules was too stressful, it was the worst thing I've ever experienced. It took a solid 2 years before things started returning to what I could call normal. So when I was a very young child, I lived in Southeast Asia. One day, early in the morning, I was just playing. My parents must have been doing their normal morning prayers, and the next thing I knew, the entirety of the ocean was just spilling over itself. We lived on the coast at the time, and it was like the whole ocean had just lifted out. My dad grabbed me and ran towards a block of apartments at the end of the street. I don't know what happened to my mum, but she must have been unable to run fast enough, because I'm pretty sure she got overwhelmed by the tide and survived by holding onto a tree. I'm not entirely sure how she survived, actually, because looking back at the extent of the 2004 tsunami, she should have been swept away completely by the force of the water. So now I'm on the top of this roof and my dad goes back in, swimming to our house to retrieve our passports and documents, while the water keeps creeping up. I think it was a 4 or 5-story building, and the water must have reached the 2nd or 3rd floor. He must have been a really strong swimmer because he got pretty much all of the documents in between waves, and probably saved my mum as well. So after this we were able to stay with friends some distance away, but everything in the town got destroyed. I realized the reason my parents don't bring up my childhood friends or try to keep in contact with their families is because they're dead. This is pretty much the only really vivid memory I have from that age, and my parents still kind of had a fear of the sea for a long time after that. They still can't handle videos of flooding. I survived an airplane crash. The story was my mother owned a few aircraft and a hangar at our small town's airport. I spent a lot of time at the airport as I was growing up, spending summer washing airplanes, sweeping out hangars and stuff. One warm summer afternoon in the mid-1980s, we planned to take a short flight in her Piper J3 Cub. This plane was built in the mid-1940s and had an aluminium skeleton covered in fabric and tandem seats, one in front, one in back. I sat in front due to the better view, and my mum, the pilot, sat in the back. I remember the pre-flight and some taxiing to the runway, but nothing else. Now the rest of the story I received secondhand. Neither my mum or I remember anything from the actual accident due to the massive head trauma we both received. But what I've heard from family and ambulance drivers who arrived at the scene is that on takeoff, the most dangerous part of any flight in my humble opinion, we lost power. Engine cut out, and I'm not really sure why. So with relatively slow airspeed and no thrust from the engine, we changed from being a beautiful flying machine to a brick. Rather quickly. Well, we dropped like a brick and proceeded to hit the ground in a rather brick-like manner. The ambulance driver who arrived at the scene thought we were done for. Things didn't look good for us. But after a helicopter ride to the nearest trauma center 100 miles away, we were still alive and breathing, and still are today. I spent about 5 weeks in the hospital, but only remember the last 2. To remember what happened, I have nasty scars on my lower lip and chin, and a dent on the side of my head. One thing I find myself wondering is, if I had the chance to relive the whole thing over, would I want to remember? At this point in my life, I can say I would not. Such things aren't worth remembering. And for those wondering if we ever flew again, you bet. As soon as my mum was able to pass a flight physical, we were both up in the air again. Yeah, I can see your mentality being okay here because there aren't as many traumatizing factors. You both seemed to live and breathe airplanes, and neither of you lost a loved one, just some memories. I imagine a lot of people as into planes as you both seem to be would be straight back in there as well. I was on a boat that sank on the Mekong River in Southeast Asia. It was a 2-day trip with an overnight stop, as it was too dangerous to be on the river after dark. We stayed in a bar and got extremely drunk as there was a serious tropical storm that had knocked the power out in this tiny village on the banks of the river. The following morning we set off on the final leg of the journey really early the next day. Everyone was feeling pretty terrible after drinking way too much, so we were trying to get a few hours nap on the boat. Around an hour or 2 into the boat journey, the boat rolled quite heavily to one side and some cups and glasses slid off the tables and fell onto the floor, startling most of us awake. We picked it all up off the floor and went back to sleep. I'm not sure how much later, but the same thing happened again, but even more violently. The boat rolled so heavily I slid from one side to the other and smashed into a table on the now lower side of the boat. At this point, I'm noticing that water is starting to come over the side and was getting deeper. Everyone was looking around at each other, looking pretty terrified, not knowing what to do. The water level was now probably waist-height. I told my girlfriend to get out of the boat and swim for the banks of the river. I had to help her climb out of the side of the boat and onto the roof, as the lower side was pretty much now fully submerged. At this point, I realized I was now stuck between the table I'd smashed into and a bench that had fallen on top of my leg, with the water now getting towards shoulder height and the boat sinking pretty rapidly. I took a final breath and went down with the boat. It's hard to say how long, but it probably sank in around a minute. 2 if you were being generous. Luckily, as the boat fully sank, the benches and tables started to float and move away from each other, and I got free without too much trouble. I opened my eyes and all I could see was brown, dirty water with some sunlight in the distance. I swam towards it, being careful not to knock my head on anything and to knock myself out, trying to swim horizontally until I was sure I was clear from the boat before I could try for the surface. I managed to pop up not too far away from the riverbank. I looked around and saw a few of the other passengers being swirled around in the rough current, trying to grab anything that was floating to save themselves, calling out for help. I'm a pretty terrible swimmer, so I realized trying to help anyone would probably just end in them dragging me down with them, so I struggled and eventually made it to the bank. I made it, but I didn't have the energy to pull myself out of the water. I half got onto some rocks and waited to catch my breath. Some other passengers that made it out of the water ran over to tell me my girlfriend was safe further downstream. The guy driving the boat had jumped in and pulled her out because she was struggling. This boat was being run by a young family that lived on board, as is customary in large parts of Southeast Asia. It's considered rude to wear your shoes inside someone's house, and as a consequence, we'd all removed our shoes when boarding the boat. We were now trying to traverse the rocky banks of the river with no shoes, trying to find other passengers. The captain of the boat was at this stage screaming at the river, not knowing if his wife and 2 kids had made it off the boat before it sank. We came across them later on. His wife had somehow managed to make it with her baby slung over her back and her young son in tow. After a while, we'd managed to flag down another passing boat. Initially, they didn't stop, but I think they must have started to see random bits of floating debris from the boat and realized what had happened and come back for us. Further down the river, we found more passengers that had been rescued by some local fishermen. We tried to account for everyone and quickly worked out that everyone was present apart from one girl. No one had seen her during the final scramble to get off the boat. We boarded the boat that we had managed to flag down and left for the nearest large town, where we'd be able to get in contact with our country's embassies. There was zero phone signal around here, and all of our phones were either in the river or completely soaked. The nearest embassies we tried to call were over 6 hours away. The local fishermen promised us that they'd search for the missing passenger. Having made it to the next town after a pretty frickin' long day by this point, we were greeted by the local police, who were in plain clothes, as it was Songkran and everyone was celebrating by having a huge 3-day water fight. They took some details and told us to come to the station in a few days. We ended up having to sit around for days sorting out loads of stuff as our passengers were lost and all the local places that could do anything were closed. Once we got enough documents to allow us to move on and fly to the capital, we had to go to our consulate to sort out new travel documents and assist in the matter about the missing passenger with her friends that had made it off the boat. She was from the same country as us. After a few days, the consulate informed us a body had been found and, unfortunately, it was the missing passenger, which was a pretty devastating experience to take along with the additional stress everyone was currently going through. I feel like I'm rambling on now, but after a few weeks we luckily managed to get new passports without flying home, which we were informed is the standard procedure for my country's passport office. Going home to get a full passport wasn't really an option as we were about 5 weeks into a 7-month trip. It was a pretty fun 6 months after that, although we did end up in some pretty dangerous situations. We were also on 2 buses that crashed, and a friend of mine that came and met us for a month was involved in a pretty nasty motorbike accident. Apologies for the poor comprehension, I've never taken time to write this experience down before, and I'm not the best writer as it is. In short, got on a boat, it sank, it wasn't too much fun. Students and teachers of the post-pandemic world, what was your best hot mic story during virtual learning? I had to defend my thesis over Zoom, and many professors came into the call to watch. My thesis was about immune response in fish to parasites. One professor joined late and forgot to mute her mic, and we got treated to this little gem. Shh, Mommy is learning about fish parasites, which is what you'll get if you don't stop peeing in the koi pond. We overheard a girl's mum saying, "Who the frick are you on the computer for this early in the morning?" and asking the same thing over and over. The teacher piped in, "I think your mic is on." This is the one thing I didn't sign up for as a teacher. I'd be doing office hours for one or the other conferences with students, and their parents would be screaming at them to stop playing games and messing around and come downstairs to do X, Y, or Z. One father shoulder rushed into the student's room to scream about a dirty mug that was in the sink, and then started screaming questions about who they were talking to and was this an online whoopee thing. Your kid is 20 and taking college classes and trapped at home because the dorms are shut. Get out, Dad. An English class Zoom call. The teacher was holding us about 15 minutes after the period had ended. She said something along the lines of, "Keep working arduously," and I responded with, "If she says arduously one more time, I'm going to flip a table." Apparently, I wasn't on mute. I did 8-hour Zoom calls for 7 weeks training for a new project. On the second week, a man unmuted his call, expelled the longest, loudest butt gas emission I've ever heard in my life, then when he finishes, mutes the call. I can see others laughing while muted at his fatal error of thinking he wasn't muted, and so he went to mute his call during the emission. I found this to be the highlight of the week, but then the following week the guy did it again. Honestly, the second time I laughed, but then started to wonder if it was some kind of power move. Not really anything super weird. I was in a meeting with my class for the first day of school, and I'd forgotten to mute myself. I then proceeded to start noisily baby-talking my cat, who was in my lap at the time. Embarrassing. I mean, I have to assume that at least some of the people on the call appreciated the cat, so you're probably only thought of as an abject maniac by most of them. I still love the idea of a teacher being interrupted by, "Yo, Mr. Chips, who's a chubby little cutie? You are. No, you are." This is from a couple of years ago. I was working for a private college which has several campuses. My campus was the online campus. Each year, the campuses took turns hosting an annual writing conference for the English and speech faculty. With it being the online campus's turn to host, we came up with the idea to make it a virtual conference which faculty members could attend from home or go to their own campus and attend with their peers in a classroom. Anyway, as one of the people on the conference committee, my job was to host several of the various breakout sessions, make sure the WebEx meeting was working, introduce the presenter of the session, monitor the Q&A, and stuff like that. I also made sure to mute the participants once it was time for the speaker to start. So this was a no live mic scenario, but one of the participants left his webcam on. During the presentation, he whips out a gigantic party sub and is just going to town on it. So while everyone's watching the presenter's PowerPoint, you can just see this guy, who I'd met before and was legit 6'8", just scarfing down a party sub in a window in the bottom of the screen. Honestly, it was more impressive than anything. In one of my classes, the girl wrote in the Zoom chat, "This is so freaking boring," not realizing that the professor could see it. In a math class I was in last year, we were taking a test which you have to turn on your mic for, their way of trying to prevent cheating. Some girl apparently forgot that hers was on and started belting out "Stand By You" by Rachel Platten at the top of her lungs. It went on for the entire song and she was still humming it when I finished the test and left the call. My sweet old Russian professor had us do the same thing for our final. At one point, text-to-speech for Google Translate goes off saying, 2011, which was one of the years we had to translate into Russian. The girl got away with it by saying, "Oh, sorry, Siri went off for some reason." I teach for an online university that requires me to conduct a weekly live session. One morning I was lecturing and a student popped in a bit late. I said, "Hello, student name. Thanks for joining us." She said, "Don't say my name, B-word," just before she realized her mic was on and turned it off. I just laughed. Grade 3 kid stopped in the middle of the class meeting and took his laptop into the bathroom with him and sat on the toilet for the rest of the meeting. I was producing a video for some university professors on a specific medical thing for a virtual learning course. I was all set up to shoot the process, and the teachers excused themselves to the next office to regroup and have a chat. I already had their wireless lav mics attached and fed to my camera, so when I sat down at the camera and put on my headphones, I immediately heard their conversation. They were criticizing me, saying they couldn't believe they hired someone so young, inexperienced in that particular medical field, how I looked, how I asked questions. Whoops! At least I made them a fine video. These days I don't put on my headphones until we're about to shoot. Last week, a kid in my brother's class forgot his camera was on during the first class and was smoking out of a giant glass pipe during the syllabus review. Ironically, my IT teacher forgot to turn off his mic and camera and proceeded to get in a very heated argument on the phone with his ex-girlfriend, who he has a kid with. Did I mention he's also a teacher at our school? Yeah, the most awkward 5 minutes of my life before he realized. During my English class, this one girl forgot to mute herself. While my teacher was talking, she almost deafened all of us on the Zoom call answering her mother's questions. We heard her mum yelling from a distance, "What class are you in?" "English!" "Oh, the hot teacher?" "Yeah, that guy." Now, even I'll admit my teacher is fairly attractive, but it does take it to another level when you get your own mother involved. Thankfully, our teacher is a chill guy and thought the whole thing was just kind of funny, and just kind of gave a general reminder to the class to keep mics muted. That girl didn't say anything for the rest of the class. I heard the smacking sound of a kid whacking the mule. His name lit up and everything. Look, everyone does that in their own time, and you couldn't see him doing it, but there is just such a profound sense of disgust just knowing that it's happening, isn't there? Either that or he was tenderizing a joint of meat with a mallet. You never know. Dude, my one teacher forgot to turn off his camera and his son was changing in the background, and the son kept looking straight at us through the camera. I remember a similar question where a mom answered that she was taking a Zoom call in the garden until a coworker mentioned that there was a kid skateboarding behind her in his birthday suit. In a thermodynamics class, one of the students said, "Holy crap, this is so much," after covering a large set of equations related to fugacity. Everyone found it relatable. One of my professor's classes had a student say something like, "I just joined 5 minutes before class and this jerk is already teaching." The professor just laughed and told him his mic was on.
A student in my class forgot to turn off their mic and we heard some background noises, doors closing, tapping, and because of a display bug, we couldn't see where the noise was from. Then the student started saying crap about the teacher. "Oh yeah, this is useless. He's just writing on a tablet. Even I could do that." Everyone heard that. The teacher heard them just insult him. That kid didn't come back to the classes after that. We had a student in my class that was logged in on a smartphone using an anonymous login who never muted their mic once. They were outside or near a window every time. When their mic picked up a sound, it would maximize their blank screen, minimizing the teacher's lesson, which was on a whiteboard. It happened a lot. The teacher didn't know who it was, and despite all of us begging them to mute, they never responded or did so, and the teacher wasn't able to mute or boot them. The worst part is, since they were connected anonymously, they never even got recorded as attending the lectures, and failed for that reason alone. All of us suffered for this one jerk who failed anyway. I was in training before classes started this year, 200-ish teachers. Only principal and the assistant principal were speaking. A teacher has her mic unmuted, the phone rings, she picks it up and says, "Hey, yeah, just sitting here in another one of these goddamn trainings." I'm a college student. Last year we had a girl place an entire dinner order over the phone with her mic on while we all tried to tell her that her mic was in fact on. I think she had us muted. She was ordering Mediterranean food. I think she got a chicken gyro. I feel like I ought to mention she was also yelling across the house to ask her mum what she wanted from wherever they were ordering from. Sadly, we didn't get to hear the mum's order. Someone in my class forgot to turn off the mic and started singing along to a song, and loudly. Someone told her, and there was this odd whoop noise, and then she cut off. I'm not a student, but I work in the tech industry. I've been in meetings where people forget to mute themselves on large company calls with hundreds of thousands of attendees, and we'll hear a fart noise and then a toilet flush sometimes. That's about as interesting as those meetings get, though. I had a student's boyfriend, they were both in college, walk up behind her on Zoom, reach into her shirt, pull out her chest bits, and start doing a little bounce around with them. She was just laughing and playfully slapping his hands away. This was probably 30 seconds after I'd just gone through my whole speech of making sure there was nothing in your browser history, Google search history, or names of folders that could be embarrassing or offensive. College student here. This was autumn 2020, so it's when we'd first switched to all online. I had an 8 a.m. class that was Renaissance through modern art history. Anyway, this one kid in the class didn't have his mic muted and he was snoring. Like snoring. My poor professor tried to wake him up and she couldn't. She also had no idea how to mute him or kick him, so we went on with the lecture. After about 5 minutes, she finally said, "I can't frickin' teach to this," and ended the Zoom meeting. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Not on Zoom, but when I was a flight attendant, we used handheld microphones to give briefings and make announcements. One female passenger got in my friend's face and screamed at her that if her bags were lost, or if her golf bag was damaged, she'd make sure to hold her personally responsible. My friend was pretty shaken not only by the loudness and anger, but by the woman's spittle, and tried to hold it together to give her her departure briefing. Anyway, her hot mic moment was as follows. "Welcome aboard flight number, service to Orlando, you frickin' B-word." The entire plane just lost it. My friend had forgotten to let go of the keys on the side of the mic, so all of the noise was picked up. During a virtual gym class for my high school, a girl forgot to mute herself during a workout and yelled some obscene things very loudly. In one of my online classes, a friend of mine Facebook stalked a cute guy from their tutorial before realizing she was still screen sharing. Stalk on your separate devices, folks. Honestly, the risk of this alone happening is enough to make me stay the hell off social media while I've been on Zoom meetings my whole life. My son calls his tablet his fix because when I first got it and the battery would die, I'd tell him I was going to fix it. So imagine his pre-kindergarten teacher's surprise last spring when he asked me if he could have his fix now that he was done with school. I cracked up and held up the fix in question and explained what he meant. Someone posted a drawing of a Hello Kitty type character on the side of their presentation during a virtual meeting. One of my coworkers mumbled, "Damn, it's got a fat butt." Which, when I looked again, yeah, the character did have a pear body shape. It was a weird thing for someone to say, though. My brain just dismissed it as me mishearing it, until they panicked a second later and apologized for not being on mute. And then I fully processed it.
Additional context, the mumbler is a 50-year-old mother of 3. It wasn't too bad, but during the graduating ceremony for a class, all the staff were asked to attend and turn on their mics to clap at certain points so it wouldn't be awkward. One such staff member forgot to turn their mic back on and was loudly, jokingly insulting their husband and asking for another drink while complaining about how long and boring this was. This was broadcast to the whole class, their parents, and anyone else listening. We stuck together and didn't tell anyone who it was, but we all knew. Mute your mics. One time in an art class, separate from my school, my dad knocked on my door. It was dead silent at that point, everyone was working on their projects. I clicked the mute button and yelled, "What?" Turns out my mic was already muted and I'd turned it on. I startled the entire class and the teacher asked if I was okay. Not virtual, but a few years back my roommate was in a chemistry lecture and the professor excused himself and left the room, but left the wireless mic on. He proceeded to vent gas loudly and came back into the lecture hall to see all of his students dying of laughter. So we were making our classes as a phone call on an app called TeamSpeak, I think. Anyways, I was using my phone to talk and my computer to work on and sometimes check Discord. At one point, we were supposed to do some exercise on our own, and I left my mic on. My friend sends me a message talking about the fact that he got a girlfriend. So I send him, "You did it, you crazy son of a witch." Then I wanted to add an emoji, so I tried to edit the message and I hit the text-to-speech button instead. The computer literally yelled, "You crazy son of a witch." And obviously, witch was spelt with a B at the start instead of a W. I was visiting my best friend during a lecture and she had her mic and video turned off. She then had to join a group discussion and sometimes unmuted herself to contribute something. After that, the whole class was supposed to present their results, and she supposedly muted herself again. I started venting to her how wasps are considered wild bees even though they have no business being bees because they're jerks, and suddenly we hear laughter from her professor and her classmates. Oops, she forgot to mute herself. We recently had a meeting with our whole team where the host forgot to turn off screen sharing. So, we all saw him respond positively to a job offer. Funniest thing I've ever seen. Or it would be if the offer hadn't included the salary, letting us all know that this grossly incompetent worker was getting paid way more than the rest of us. Still, we were just glad to see him go. This was a conference call for work, but it was a big call with something like 12 people, and I was new, so I was really just listening as the senior analysts were discussing something. The call was going on for a while, so I took my laptop into the bathroom with me to take a number 2, flushed the toilet, and everyone just stopped talking. Turns out I didn't mute my mic, and everyone just heard a toilet flushing in the middle of the meeting. Luckily, no one cared and they all laughed about it, but I was mortified. I wonder what else they heard. A student's mother had the habit of standing just off camera and very closely observing her kid. I know this because one time the student forgot to disable the mic. Everyone heard how the mother was coaching the student how to act. Don't look my way, smile, pay attention. It was next-level helicoptering. Bad parenting in my opinion. Our school has a good counselor and the student is getting help. All the teachers had been advised to limit contact with the mother and not make waves, lest she withdraw the student or redouble her controlling behavior. I worry about it constantly. Well, you know that feature of pressing the spacebar to talk? Well, someone in my class was too used to pressing the spacebar to pause a video and mistakenly pressed it to pause the class to speak to someone in their home, but would instead say nonsense while the teacher was speaking, and this happened multiple times. While giving a lecture on the heated arguments among different schools of psychology, our professor screamed, "Fire! There's a fire!" And most of the confused students, including the teacher's pets, replied, "I agree, those were some lit points." Things turned out funnier and scarier when the professor went on with the screaming, and we could hear her calling the rest of her house for help, and then their brother joining the chorus of "Fire" sparking up her switchboard. So yeah, a confused, concerned class of 50 sat through an entire episode of "Put Out the Fire" while our professor revealed every dynamic of their family through her freaked-out screams. 30 minutes later, she came back to her laptop to unmute herself, only to find 100 "Are you okay?" texts in the chat box. Given how fried some of our brains were in the pandemic, if someone shouted fire during one of my team meetings, I'm not entirely certain I wouldn't have sprinted out of my apartment and halfway down the street before I realized I was in fact not in danger. You seem like a nice class, though. During one of the lectures, our cat came into the room and jumped onto my lap. I proceeded to tell him how very cute he is and how much I love him in the stupidly sweetest voice possible because he is, in fact, the best boy. Then, a full minute or two into me praising the cat, a message popped up from my classmate saying I was unmuted. I had a mini spook and I replied with, "Oh, I was just talking to him," and sent a picture of the cat. It was extra awkward because I walk around with a resting angry face and barely talk to anyone when we're at uni. So my classmate later admitted that the only reason no one warned me sooner was because it didn't occur to them that that person with this sweet voice was in fact me. The president of the university I attended until 2007 was presenting something with a bunch of other important people. This was being recorded for later upload and right when the pandemic was starting, around March 2020. His wife appeared in the middle of the talk, mad as hell, telling him to go clean the toilet and that she's not his servant to clean his stuff. A few very awkward seconds later, he just says, "Maybe we have to go edit this out later." Now imagine how viral this must have been. I haven't had any ties to the university since 2007, yet somehow that video got onto my WhatsApp. I remember once during English class I forgot to turn off my mic. So obviously I was browsing Reddit during class and giving out low laughs to memes, and everyone could hear me. Didn't stop until the teacher asked what was so funny. An elementary student left the room with their camera on for a moment and the mother walked by completely undressed. I'm guessing that she asked him to leave the room so she could change or something, not realizing the camera was in fact still going. This particular teacher was going through a rough time and the class could feel it. We assured her that we had done our homework and that she could take a rest for the time being. She agreed and told us she'd switch her mic off and sleep for a while as we did whatever. Her husband was right beside her and the mic was not turned off. She told him, "I'm so lucky to have these students," and started sobbing to her husband. We all heard this, but kept quiet to prevent her from being embarrassed. She slept well during that time and we sent her a thank you gift collectively. I had a student give a very sarcastic response to a question I asked, and before I could respond, his mum started chewing into him and whacking him with a chunkler. His mic and video were on the whole time. For those asking, I didn't report the mother who took time off from her only remaining job during a pandemic so she could make sure her sons were able to access their education. Didn't strike me as awful parenting. I did call her after school to talk and let her know I'd keep her updated on how her son was doing during class, so hopefully, between the two of us, we could keep him out of trouble. And some of you clearly didn't grow up around Hispanic families. La chancla is part of the culture. I'm a student and my teacher was talking to his wife at first. Pretty normal, right? Well, she leaves and then he gets on the phone and says, "Yeah, sweetie, my wife just left. Want to come over?" The entire class went bat crap insane. My college class got to hear me tell my dog about what a good boy he was. I'm a tutor, and my student forgot to mute themselves before leaving for a 5-minute break. She had a beautiful conversation with her brother about how much of a C-word I was, how much I sucked, and how poor I and my house look. Luckily, I always record my tutoring sessions, so I finished as if nothing happened, sent the clip straight to my supervisor, and the student got booted off the tutoring program, as I'm the only tutor advanced enough for her grade that's able to take her. Someone in our science class didn't realize he was unmuted and called a widely disliked kid the N-word with a hard R. Somehow, he didn't even get in trouble, though. I asked a question on Zoom for someone and he didn't answer. He had no video on. I asked again to confirm he was there, and silence. "Hello?" Then he panics and says, "Sorry, I'm peeing." Did I need to know that? No, I didn't. What's a devastating historical event that nobody talks about? The Carrington Event. In 1859, solar flares hit the Earth, causing an aurora borealis effect to be seen all over the world. It lasted for several days, during which time it was reportedly bright enough to read by at midnight. Telegraph operators reported receiving shocks and burns from their devices, and in some cases removed the batteries powering the telegraphs as signals were being disrupted by the geomagnetic storm. After removing the batteries, the telegraphs still operated, in some cases better than they had when powered. It wasn't particularly devastating at the time, but it's estimated that if a similar storm were to hit us today, it would cripple the entire planet for potentially decades. The estimated repair cost in the US alone is measured in the trillions. In 2012, a similar storm missed the Earth by 9 days. I'm in college studying history. The year of living dangerously in Indonesia in 1965 through 66 saw absolute chaos and still has a marked effect on their society. It's possibly one of the largest mass killings of the last century, and I heard nothing about it ever living in the West. It's hard to say how many people actually died, but estimates range from 100,000 to 300,000, and even on up to 500,000 or 1 million dead. Basically, the Communist Party in Indonesia was heavily influenced by Maoism and ethnic Chinese civilians. It was the largest communist party outside of China. President Sukarno, who had helped the country through Japanese occupation and independence from the Dutch and British, had kept the house of cards balanced but was beginning to be swayed by communist policies. The military, staunchly anti-communist and largely supported by the US, would be looking to take power. Then, one night, 6 high-ranking members of the military were abducted and killed. The army spread the word that the communists were to blame and initiated mass reprisals. Killings, interrogations, and imprisonment ran rampant over the islands, and even ethnic Chinese or just suspected communists were taken. Despite working with Sukarno for many years, the US would support his liquidation and the rise of the military. It's unclear how extensive American support to the army was, but it's probable that they aided in training and might have even helped compile names of communists to the army. Eventually, a general by the name of Suharto would take power, and Sukarno would be placed under house arrest with no power. Today, the massacres and chaos aren't really taught in Indonesian schools, and it's clear that many have not come to terms with what happened. However, the mass killings of possibly 1 million or more people should rank up there in devastating events. Yeah, this is an event that I, a history major, have never even heard about, and it's called the Year of Living Dangerously? Why does it sound like some obnoxious rich kid's adventure OE and not like the absolute horror it must have been with that much death and terror on the streets for an entire year? The Victoria Hall disaster, all because kids were being kids in a death trap. The disaster started when about 1,000 children in the audience of a variety show were told they could get free toys. Kids began pouring down the aisles to get the toys, blocking the exits and piling on top of one another. Toys being given to the lower seats meant those in the balconies, unaccompanied by adults, thought they'd miss out, creating a rush to go down to get them. The exiting children turned a bend around which were double doors. One of these being locked created a bottleneck. Queen Victoria ended up giving money for the children's funerals. In the end, 183 of them were crushed to death. The locked door led to one boy who was there growing up and inventing the push-bar fire escape, a door that can be locked from one side but easily opened from the other. The Andesian Massacre of 2005 in Uzbekistan. It's the largest mass shooting in Asia since Tiananmen Square, with over 1,000 killed and even more wounded. The Uzbek government forcefully silenced reform protests by firing into the crowd and then kicked out 90% of Westerners in the country when the US government and UN tried to investigate. Terrible loss of life that rarely gets remembered because the Uzbek government tried so hard to cover it up. The Goiânia accident in Brazil, where cesium-137 was handled by many people, including children. It's regarded as the worst radioactive incident to happen in Brazil. It was a radioactive contamination accident that happened on September 13, 1987, after a radiotherapy machine from an abandoned hospital was illegally stripped for parts, and said parts were stolen. On September 16th, one of the thieves opened a cesium capsule, then on September 18th sold it to a scrapyard. The same night, the owner of the scrapyard saw a blue glow in the machine's parts, which ended up being the opened capsule. Thinking it might be valuable, he brought it to his home. Over the next 3 days, he invited friends and family to see the strange glowing substance. On September 21st, one of his friends succeeded in freeing several rice-sized grains of the glowing material from the opened capsule. He then started sharing some of them with friends and family. On September 25th, the capsule was again sold to another scrapyard, although 1 day before the sale, more dust was removed from the capsule by the scrapyard's owner's brother. The brother then took the dust home and spread it on the concrete floor where later his daughter would play in it with the dust. She also ate while sitting on the floor and dust particles fell on her food, contaminating it. One of the family members of the owner of the first scrapyard noticed that many people around her fell ill, and on September 28th, she reclaimed the capsule from the second scrapyard and brought it to the hospital. In the morning of September 29th, it was confirmed that the material was radioactive, and the doctors persuaded authorities to take immediate action on the matter. The city, state, and national governments were all aware of the incident by the end of the day. News of the radiation incident was broadcast on local, national, and international media. Within days, nearly 130,000 people went to local hospitals concerned they might have been exposed. Of these, only 250 were indeed contaminated, some with radioactive residue still on their skin. 4 of these people died. I feel the need to mention the Bronze Age collapse. It's not as though nobody talks about it at all, but considering how catastrophic it was, it doesn't get nearly enough attention. At this time, civilizations were still pretty scarce, but the Eastern Mediterranean was full of them. We can't pinpoint an exact reason, but at some point it all just fell apart. The Mycenaeans? Gone. The Hittites? Gone. The Minoans? Gone. And the Egyptians? Barely clinging on and having serious problems. There are many things that happened around that time in that general area that could be the culprit. Volcanoes, earthquakes, drought, famine, war, and of course the oft-cited invasions from foreigners that came by boat that historians have named the Sea People, because we have basically no idea where they came from. In reality, it was probably a combination of some of, or even all of them. Taiping Heavenly Kingdom of Hong Xiuquan. Put simply, it was an upstart kingdom in 1850s China that directly and indirectly led to the deaths of millions, maybe 10 million people, through massacre and famine. Han Xiuquan believed he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ and persuaded enough people to follow along and start a civil war. Check out God's Chinese Son by Jonathan Spence for more information. Baghdad used to be one of the biggest and most vibrant cities in the world until the 1200s, until the Mongols came. Baghdad didn't recover its year 1200 population until the 1980s. The Second Congo War. It's the deadliest conflict since World War II with about 5.4 million deaths, a vast majority of them due to malnutrition and disease. A lot of African history is overlooked, so here's a few more 20th century African conflicts to look into if you're interested. The Boer Wars, Mau Mau Uprising, Rhodesian Bush War, First and Second Liberian Civil Wars, Sierra Leone Civil War, the Angolan Civil War, First and Second Sudanese Civil Wars, Somali Civil War, Eritrean-Ethiopian War, Congo Crisis, Nigerian Civil War. Yep, all of these had massive casualties proportionate to their population, most of them civilian, and we're basically ignorant about all of them. That's our Euro and US-centric history books for you, folks. I'm always amazed that people know so little about Pol Pot in Cambodia. His regime killed 25% of its population. Let that sink in. 1 in 4. If you were educated, you were one of the first killed. The extent of what happened in Cambodia is really hard to fathom. I spent 2 months traveling around Southeast Asia a few years back, and one of the days that will always be fresh in my memory was the Somba trip to the killing fields outside of Siem Reap. Our driver, Mr. Sony, was touring us around to various historical sites, the S21 Museum as well, and would never step foot into any of them. I remember asking him if he'd ever been to any of these sites, and he said, "I don't go in because my entire family is in there." Absolutely heartbreaking. A huge portion of an entire generation just wiped out. During World War II, the Japanese had invaded the Alaskan island of Attu. On the island was the village of Attu, where the Aleutian tribe had lived for centuries. The only non-natives were the wife, schoolteacher, and priest husband who were elderly and beloved by the townspeople. The husband was shot in front of his wife by the Japanese. After that, the Japanese loaded the native population onto ships back to Japan, where they worked in prisoner of war camps where many died from disease and execution. The Japanese saw them as lower than soldier prisoners of war and almost subhuman, because they didn't fight back and thus treated them horribly. When the war ended, only a handful of the native population survived, and they went back home only to find their village burnt down. They left the island and it now remains uninhabited basically, driving the Attu tribe to extinction. Years later, the Japanese left a peace monument on the island in honor of the American and Japanese soldiers that died there, but have yet to apologize to the descendants of the Attu tribe they destroyed. The Johnstown flood of 1889, the deadliest civil engineering disaster on US soil. It killed 2,209 people. After a dam collapsed, it swept up rail cars, passengers, trees, an entire town of 10,000, and then swirled it around and ejected the debris downriver into a bridge where it all caught fire. Destruction was beyond belief, and all because some rich steel magnates up the mountain didn't maintain the dam they used to keep their fishing reservoir. It's actually worse than that. The rich wanted to take their carriages across the dam, but the top of the dam was too narrow for their carriages. So, to save some money, they lowered the structure, which made it wider but also destabilized the building. They were warned about this, but because they're rich jerks, they didn't care. So it wasn't just that they didn't maintain the dam, it was them actively effing it up. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. The year 536 marked the beginning of a very bad time period. Basically, several natural disasters and social upheaval abso-frickin-lutely devastated multiple societies. It's thought that a volcanic eruption blocked out enough sun to cause crop failures across Europe and as far as China. While this was happening, terrible plagues were also affecting the Middle East. Economies everywhere felt a ruin and stagnation in the years that followed because several other eruptions later made things worse. The Mayans' society and the lost scriptures that we still haven't found, on top of the scriptures we still can't seem to decipher. One thing that doesn't get talked about was more of a phenomenon or major problem than an event, and that was how many people died in theater fires due to poor design, combustible materials, few fire exits, and panic. One of the worst was the Iroquois Theater in Chicago, which is both the deadliest theater fire and the deadliest single building fire in US history, where patrons died after sparks from an arc light set a curtain on fire, then a chain reaction started, exacerbated by failures of the things in a place that were supposed to combat fire. The theater had been overbooked to compensate for earlier poor sales, causing some to sit blocking the exits. The fire was immediately worsened when performers opened the stage door to get outside, as it turned the fire into a fireball. Many people were held inside by iron gates that had been put in place to prevent people from sneaking in without paying. As people fled, they tumbled downstairs, trampled each other, and got squashed to death. Their unfamiliarity with the building got them stuck in dead ends and up against windows. Many jumped from fire escapes and died, while those behind them were saved, the bodies of the earlier jumpers cushioning their falls. All in all, 602 people died, many of whom were children. The story is a lot more complicated and sordid with city corruption and stuff. The one takeaway is the incident promoted the development and use of the panic bar. I was fascinated with the story of the Osage Indians in the United States. The book Killers of the Flower Moon is an excellent book detailing basically what happened. They got sent to Oklahoma and found huge oil reserves on their land. They were rich and hired white people as servants, which didn't go over well. People tried to marry in to get part of the riches. There were tons of murders, and the investigation led to the creation of the FBI in the United States. And the book about this tragedy has been adapted into a fairly well-received movie, if any of you want to know more. It's such a remarkably recent historical event, too. The New London School Explosion. On the afternoon of March 18, 1937, the shop teacher at the school in New London, Texas, turned on an electric sander. Unbeknownst to him, there was a massive natural gas leak under the school. The sander sparked, which ignited the gas and caused a massive explosion that killed almost 300 students and teachers. It was absolutely horrific. The force of the explosion was so great that a 2-ton block of concrete crushed a car parked 200 feet away. This event is actually why natural gas has a smell now. They started adding it after the explosion so that something like this couldn't happen again so easily. My grandfather was actually one of the survivors of the explosion. He never talked about it, even to his own family, so I didn't really know too much about it other than the fact that he had survived it, until after his death. Towards the end of his life, he'd suffered a series of strokes that left him pretty physically incapacitated. So my dad had given him a voice-activated tape recorder and suggested maybe he could record his memoirs for his grandkids to listen to someday. As it turns out, he did. We have hours and hours of cassette tapes of him telling the story of his actually pretty interesting life, including a big section on the New London school explosion. For the sake of everyone's privacy, I'll call my grandfather Papa and use an initial for anyone else. He was in the 8th grade when it happened, in his English class at about 3 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. At the beginning of class, Papa and his buddy T had been messing around and being loud in the back of the classroom, as 8th grade boys often do. His teacher, Miss M, had had enough of their disruptions and made Papa switch seats with another student. He moved to the girl's desk in the front row and she moved into his desk in the back of the room. When the school exploded, they were taking a test on the book Ivanhoe. Papa was knocked about for a short time, and when he woke up, he couldn't see anything because the dust was so thick. He looked down and saw that his pencil had blown clear through his hand. He saw that the whole back of the room was gone. I won't go into details, but there were bodies, and parts of bodies, everywhere. The students in the front half of the room survived. The students in the back half did not. That included Papa's friend T and the little girl who'd been forced to take Papa's desk because of his misbehavior at the beginning of class. If he hadn't been acting up, he would have been killed and she would have lived. He carried the guilt of her death until the day he died. Papa's classroom was on the 2nd floor. There wasn't any way to get to the room other than the open cavity of the explosion. After the few seconds of initial shock wore off, he and another classmate jumped into action. They were the only 2 kids in the classroom who hadn't been badly injured. They made a tourniquet out of a sock and shoelace for a girl with a severe injury to her arm and dug out their teacher, who was alive but badly injured. By then, men were running in underneath the hole, so Papa and the other boy started lowering the badly injured to them. Then those who could walk, including Papa, climbed down. He ran off to look for his older brother B to see if he was okay. As it turned out, B had been supposed to be in geometry class. However, he and his buddy had snuck out to go fishing. The explosion happened as they were heading to the door to head out to the parking lot. The force of the blast sent them tumbling head over foot across the lot. They were both banged up and dazed, but they survived. The rest of their geometry class was killed. I don't know that there's a moral in the fact that both my grandfather and his brother survived because they were misbehaving that day. I do know that it weighed very heavily on both of them for the rest of their lives. There's a lot more to the story about the day and the aftermath, most of it absolutely horrific, but I won't go into all of it here. A few small tidbits though. Papa and the boy who helped him rescue the other students from their classroom were both awarded medals and certificates of valor for their actions that day. Nearly every family in town lost a child. Some of them lost all their children. I'm sure you can imagine the extreme toll this took on everyone's mental health. Papa described New London in the months following the explosion as a town with no children. To help with the healing process, the oil companies actively recruited families with kids to transfer in, so that there was a sense of normalcy when school started again in the fall. And Papa had played the French horn in the school band. However, when the school started up again, he was asked to switch to trumpet as the entire trumpet section had been lost. He went on to fight in World War II, and he saw some of the worst conflict in the Pacific, including Peleliu and the liberation of Manila, but he said that nothing he saw was ever as bad as what he saw on the day of the explosion. I'm always amazed that more people didn't know about it. It was major international news at the time. Galveston, Texas was once considered to be one of the most important commercial ports in the United States, and was referred to by several fantastical names such as Queen City of the Gulf and the Wall Street of the West. All of that changed when it suffered a near-direct hit from a devastating Category 4 hurricane in 1900, the deadliest natural disaster in American history. Pretty much the entire city was destroyed by a storm surge, and anywhere from 8,000 to 12,000 people were killed. Galveston was rebuilt but never truly regained its status. Houston became the state's commercial center in the storm's wake, in addition to other factors. The Bronze Age collapse. Arguably more devastating than the fall of the Western Roman Empire. So much knowledge lost. Truly one of history's great mysteries. I recommend reading up on it, it's really interesting. Until I learned about it, I had no idea that there were once whole other Dark Ages that happened before what we normally think of the Dark Ages, although that term is a misnomer. The Bronze Age collapse ushered in a centuries-long Dark Age that lasted until classical Greece. The Taiping Rebellion. Around the same time as the American Civil War, a massive civil war raged in China. The rebellion was led by Hong Xiuquan, who proclaimed himself to be the brother of Jesus Christ. Estimated 20 to 30 million dead. For reference, 1 million died in the American Civil War. Again, the scale of these events compared to their contemporary European or American ones is always absolutely mind-boggling. The Rwandan atrocities have got to be one of these events. I watched Shake Hands with the Devil here a while ago, and I highly recommend it. Unspeakable acts of brutality inflicted. It still gives me chills. In 535, humans went through hell. Many reported a strange color in the skies, not just in Europe. A dense, dry fog was also reported in Asia and the Middle East. Even the regions now known as the Americas weren't spared. There was drought in Peru. Temperatures were rather low in some places. It snowed even in the summertime. One survivor, a Roman politician named Cassiodorus, explained about the bluish sun and no shadows being cast even in the noon. It's been hypothesized that Iceland holds the reason for the events between the years 535 and 536. Iceland is best known for its volcanoes, and it was possible one such was to blame. Leprosy colonies of Hawaii. People who were diagnosed with leprosy were forcibly banished to Kalaupapa to live out the rest of their lives. They were dug graves and had to stand in them while their families and friends basically had a living funeral for them, where they had dirt thrown on them and were pronounced dead to the world and no longer part of the community. This continued through 1969, even after Hawaii officially became a state. The Highland Clearances. Over a period of about 150 years between the 18th and 19th centuries, English and lowland Scottish landlords evicted thousands upon thousands of Highland Scots from their ancestral homelands and replaced them with sheep. It's hard to classify as a historical event because it went on for so long, and it's usually interpreted as an ambiguous series of largely isolated incidents. There were attacks on villages in which landlords would burn their tenants' houses to the ground to get them to leave, and burned their land so that nothing would grow. Multiple people were caught in the fires and died. During the Glencoe massacre, 30 members of Clan MacDonald were murdered by Scottish government forces for supporting the Jacobite uprising. The Irish potato famine also affected the Highland Scots, who grew potatoes, and many people were starved or were forced to leave as well. As a result, there was a series of mass migrations in which Scots travelled to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the US, and largely lost their language and culture. It's very sad, and all that's basically why Highland culture and language has largely been lost. The disease outbreaks that hit the Americas with the arrival of the Europeans. You hear about a 90% death rate, and it sounds made up, but whatever the actual number was, entire civilizations were literally wiped out. Cultures that had existed for thousands of years are just gone, with barely a record left. You have stories of people coming across whole villages of corpses. These people died never having even seen the Europeans, never knowing what was killing them and their loved ones, and were totally hopeless to do anything about it. China during World War II. The Japanese absolutely decimated the areas they occupied during the war, not just through weapon-based exterminations, but through biological warfare that resulted in the slow deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, largely forgotten by history. I'm not in any way a supporter of the current Chinese government, but I feel like where they're at is a response not only to the communist government tyranny of the Mao era, but to the horrific Japanese atrocities that allowed it to happen in the first place. The assassination of James Garfield. He was a known advocate for racial equality. He appointed black men into his cabinet and tried expanding public education into the South to get more African Americans an education. He tried to fight for racial equality but died 4 months into his presidency, which messed it up. The blinding of 15,000 soldiers. The Bulgarians and Byzantines would clash every couple of years, and after one battle, the Byzantine leader just snapped and cut out the eyes of the soldiers that surrendered, then sent them back home. The Bulgarian leader died upon hearing the news. What's the stupidest defense you've seen someone make in court? As a public defender, you're thrown into a lot of crappy cases with little hope of winning and with very little time to win them in. My approach was to make any argument within the ethical rules that govern attorneys, which led me to a hilarious court appearance. My client was charged with possession of Mary J., green herb, a misdemeanor first offense that carries no jail time in my state. Client and his friend were smoking in a park, some citizen reported it to the police, and the cops come and find them in their car after smoking. My client admits to the cop that he was smoking. Obviously, I'm thinking he's got no defense here. The other guy admits to smoking and gives the police the stuff and pipe from his backpack. The entirety of the evidence was the admission and the physical evidence. So I argue at trial, bench trial with no jury, with zero expectation of winning, that the state failed to prove my client ever possessed the Mary J in the first place. Your Honor, for all we know, the other guy at all times had possession of the Mary J. For all we know, he held the pipe to my client's lips and lit it for him. A discussion amongst myself, the judge, and the prosecutor ensued about whether you can smoke green herb and not be in possession of it. I got the decision a few months later. Not guilty. The judge asked, "Why are you late?" The defendant replied, "My mom didn't wake me up." "How old are you?" 42. A story from driver's ed. Guy was in court for killing 2 relatively young people while drunk. The defendant's lawyer claimed that the teens should be at fault because this man was drunk and they were sober. They should have had the reaction time to get out of the way. Pretty stupid defense, but in terms of the worst defense, nothing beats that. Absolutely morally appalling. A guy was in court for a DUI. He insisted on taking the stand when his lawyer advised him not to. Turned out he wanted the judge to know the cop who arrested him was just some rude kid trying to be a big shot, and he wasn't even drunk, he'd only had 2 bottles of wine with dinner. His lawyer interrupted him, trying to get him to stop talking, and he told his lawyer to shut up. Then the judge advised him to listen to his lawyer, and he told the judge, "I'm not a damn child, don't interrupt me." And the judge just smiled, sat back, and said, "Please proceed." We all knew it was over for this guy. He got maxed on the charge and advised in the future if he was going to pay for a lawyer, he should listen to him. When he said the bit about 2 bottles, you should have heard the collective "ooh" go through the courtroom when he said it. Everyone but him knew he was smoked. Yeah, I don't know what walk of life this guy was from where he thought that admitting drinking that much and then telling your judge to shut up would get him anything but maximum prejudice. Kinda sounds like a sheltered millionaire's son or someone who's never driven himself before. I was the bailiff on a case detailing a pretty horrific kidnapping. The defendant was pro per, acting as his own attorney. During jury selection, he had the option to wear civilian clothing instead of his jail clothes. but chose to remain in his jail attire, complete with handcuffs and waist restraints. It came time for him to cross-examine the victim. Understandably, she was very upset before he even started. She was crying and refused to look at him. The defendant's first question went like this: "You seem upset. Does it make you nervous to be questioned by the person that did this to you?" You could hear a pin drop in that courtroom. He was found guilty and sentenced to 46 years to life in prison. My personal take was he tried to ask to be questioned by the person you falsely accused of doing this to you and just kind of flubbed it. I knew a guy that was charged with pimping. I won't get into the morality of pimping because that's another subject entirely, but his defense was that he wasn't a pimp. He was a rapper and a substance dealer. Like, why the frick would you admit to being that in court? They threw the book at his butt with like 20 to 26 years. New law for pimping people below a certain age, the unspeakable act, charges like that. He actually was a dealer though, so maybe he thought his case would work. But clearly they had recordings of him from jail where he was talking to this girl and outing himself like an idiot. Recently, there was a case over whether Colorado green herb suppliers have to pay overtime. Federal law says yes, you have to pay hourly employees overtime. The lawyer for the company argued that since Mary J was federally illegal, federal overtime laws didn't apply. The case document reads as follows. Helix's attorneys moved to dismiss the case on the grounds that a federal court had no jurisdiction to hear the case because Colorado's recreational Mary J industry is in violation of the Controlled Substances Act. Basically, "I'm already breaking the law, so the rest of them don't apply" is the hottest legal take I've heard in a while. "I only hit him. He fell off the building himself," said a stupid person who Spartan kicked my uncle off a high school building. I gave testimony as a health professional in a child custody case. The mother wanted to revoke the father's joint physical custody of their daughter. The issue was that girl was asked to wipe her father's butt, apply lotion, and wash him. The father's case was that because he was obese, fatigued, suffering from frequent diarrhea, and taxed to take care of his own hygiene without assistance, it was acceptable for her to do this as long as she wore gloves to avoid contracting Hep C from him. He also argued that it taught her a lesson about compassion and caring for those unable to do so themselves, and helped them to bond. Truly incredible. I knew a guy who said that the police who responded to the domestic that he had perpetrated had no right to charge him with crystal possession since the crystal was so pure no one could have seen it. A friend of mine once got a ticket for leaving her car standing in the marked-off no parking zone in front of a grocery store, which she thought was outrageous because she was just running to get a pack of smokes. Then she saw how much the ticket was for, something like $120, which she thought was just ridiculous because damn it, she was just running in for a pack of smokes. I mean, come on, how is that worth $120? So, her plan was to go to court and contest the ticket and point out to the judge how ridiculous that was and offer to compromise at like maybe $40 because for Pete's sake, she was just running in for a pack of smokes and let's be reasonable here. Yep, her plan was to haggle with the judge over how much the ticket should be worth. She goes to court and sits there for most of the day waiting for her case to be called, and eventually she gets bored and goes outside to grab a smoke and hang out. And while she's out there, her case is called. She missed the whole thing, didn't even get to try the whole, "Come on, $120? For that? Come on, I'll give you $40 and even that's highway robbery," defense on the judge, and got hit for the full value of the ticket plus court costs. Aggravated criminal unspeakable act. The defense attorney said not guilty because it only lasted for a minute. My God. It says here that you were drinking and driving, said the judge. No, sir. I drank and then I drove. He was found guilty. A domestic case, the husband was the accused. The couple was in their late 70s or early 80s. When asked if he did indeed attack his wife, the husband started complaining that some 40 years ago the wife pretended to be ill and he had had to do the laundry all by himself for one day, as if he expected the judge to just go, okay, I guess that's cool then. It wasn't legit court, just court to change my last name. I was 14 and wanted to change my last name to my stepdad's. My biological father had to be present for the appointment and sign off on it, and it went something like this. The judge started, "Okay, if everyone will sign here, your name will be changed." My bio-dad said, "I'm not signing." "Well, why not? If she gets pregnant out of wedlock, I want the baby to have my last name." Reminder that I was 14 years old and had never even kissed a boy, and I hadn't spoken to my dad in at least 5 years. The judge told him that was an irrelevant point and convinced him to sign the paper. I was just glad to leave that part of my life behind me that day. My sister told the judge that the light wasn't that red, Then he said he was going to suspend her license and she said, "But my dad already took it away." In my theoretical future court date, I'm honestly going to try something like this, but on a much more juvenile note. Jail time for grand larceny? Your Honor, my mother already slapped me on the wrist and took away all of my toys. Motion to dismiss because of prior punishment, plus time served in my room. It was Independence Day, Your Honor, a day to celebrate the freedoms that our forefathers fought and died for, a day to celebrate what this country is. So yes, Judge, I did do some crystal. For freedom. This was in substance treatment court. To be honest, the judge chuckled and just said, "Don't be stupid." Then the next 5 defendants tried the same thing, and the judge threw the book progressively harder each time. The key here is, get to court early so your BS excuse is the first. I took a guy to small claims court. His defense was, "I don't have the product, so I couldn't ship it to him, obviously." The judge was like, "But you took his money." The guy said, "Yeah, so I could buy the product and ship it to him." "And did you do that?" "Not yet." "Do you have his money?" "No, I had an emergency and I had to spend it." And that was that. I won. I never touched her, I never hurt her. I'd never do that, except for that one time at the cabin. The guy became an instant meme in our country. I overheard this guy tell the officer that yes, his car license was suspended, but his certification for driving the truck isn't, and neither is his moped license. 3 people and the judge tried to explain that a suspended license means he's lost his privilege to drive in general and altogether. He kept fighting it and saying he wasn't fixing anything because he's driving a moped and that license is still okay. He came out with saying it's suspended for several old DUIs. Lawyer here, bored at work and not wanting to get started on my actual job, so I've seen some very stupid crap, although mostly I don't do criminal cases, so the stupid crap I tend to see requires a little bit of explanation. However, when I was in law school, I worked with a group that helped get restraining orders for people in, shall we say, troublesome relationships. Family court in Queens was very much a cattle call situation, and it was easy to watch hearing after hearing, which I always found fun. On one particular day, there were 2 absolutely amazing hearings. One was a case of 2 gay men. The guy claiming he had been attacked was a huge man, fat and definitely over 6'4". He was against his tiny partner. At first, the magistrate was very incredulous, likely thinking what we're all thinking about the massive size disparity between the two. When the tiny guy got up to speak, he started scolding his large partner for saying things like that, and at some point he threw a pen at the bigger man. The bigger guy started to cry, and then the little guy started taunting him. Essentially, he won the case for his partner. The other involved a man trying to get an ex parte order against his girlfriend, which is relatively rare. It happens, but the vast majority are women getting them against men. This time, however, before this particular hearing could start, a woman came into the courtroom, flanked by 2 other women. They were all 3 straight out of central casting for what you'd imagine New York City gang women to look like. They walked in, saw the woman's partner seated in the courtroom, although his hearing wasn't up yet, and immediately started threatening everyone in the room, but especially the magistrate. The magistrate had them escorted out with the bailiffs, who called in extra security. About 30 minutes later, the guy's hearing was up. The magistrate basically immediately granted the restraining order and said he'll put in a note for the full hearing about that woman's conduct. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was sitting in court for a traffic violation. The guy in front of me had a speeding ticket. To fight it, he pulled out a large stack of papers about 3/4 of an inch thick. The stack of papers was a law he pulled out from the 1990s from a different country. The poor judge actually had to read it through. I'm an animal control officer, and I was seeking permanent possession of this guy's dog after he drunkenly bit, choked, and tormented it. He'd already been charged with animal cruelty before, which is a separate case date. This guy is what we'll call a seasonal transient, meaning he was part of our homeless population, but he only stayed in the city during the summer. In court, his defense, as he represented himself, ranged from admitting he had made a drunken mistake to accusing the witnesses during cross-examination of being biased against homeless people. His story also fluctuated about why he did this to his dog. First, because she's aggressive to other dogs and I was disciplining her, despite no other dogs having ever been present, to a vague, she wasn't listening to me. My favorite parts were the following. He tried to argue that because we had no photos of physical damage, no mistreatment had occurred. Unfortunately for him, our state cruelty laws don't require an animal to be injured to be considered mistreated. And then it came up that he had pulled her up by the ears so that her front feet didn't touch the ground and bit her multiple times on the ears and face. In court, he defended this by claiming it was a valid training technique used by, quote, Alaskans and many breeders. His proof was a handwritten name and number of a breeder friend of his on a square of paper. He lost. His dog, an absolute sweetheart with huge bat ears, and not an ounce of dog aggression the shelter could find after multiple behavioral tests and assessments, was adopted by an older retired couple looking for a good pet to keep them company at home. I was in court for a traffic violation in the state of Florida. I was sitting with a room full of people who were also contesting their tickets. There was a lady who looked like she was a waitress who got up to make her case in front of the judge. She point-blank told the judge in front of the officer that ticketed her that her violation was bullcrap from a know-it-all cop. The judge then questioned the officer. Your Honor, the defendant's car was going 75 in 35 zone and ran several stoplights. The judge then proceeded to ask why those charges were unreasonable. Her answer was parody level. I was drinking last night and I woke up late. I couldn't lose another job, so I needed to be in on time. She ended up paying $500 for wasting the judge's time in addition to her tickets. Oh, hands down, it's a tie between every sovereign citizen I've seen in court for a simple traffic violation like displaying expired plates or not registering a vehicle. The defense is always a stupid variation of, this court doesn't have the jurisdiction because the wrong flag is displayed in the courtroom. I defended a guy on a DUI that jumped into the back seat after he got pulled over and claimed someone else was driving. He was the only one in the car. Jesus, take the wheel. I watched a friend try a DWI case. Her client testified that she wasn't drunk while driving and therefore not guilty because she was actually high on crystal at the time. My friend put her head down and started hitting it against the desk. Guilty. Haha, do you think that this was preceded by the client confidently telling her attorney those fateful words, "Don't worry, I've got this," before striding up to the podium? I hope so. I had a coworker arrested for scamming me out of $1,500. He legit tried to countersue me for extortion. His extortion case was a recording of me saying, either you give me my money back right now or I'm calling the police and having you arrested for theft. The judge asked, why do you think showing up at this young lady's home unannounced after she's made it clear to you she's not romantically interested was an acceptable thing to do? The guy I was getting a restraining order against just said, I just wanted to lick the inside of her dog's mouth. In my law graduation, I was working as a trainee for the college, a lawyer assistant, and I honestly saw the following scene. The judge asking, where were you on Tuesday at 11 p.m.? The accused said, I was working on the street selling green herb. You were doing what? Selling green herb. Their lawyer looked at them like, what the frick? And I saw this go down while waiting for my traffic ticket. The judge said, so, you were seen pulling a stop sign out of the ground and throwing it in the river. Yes, sir. Were you drunk? No, sir. The ticket says you were intoxicated. No, sir. Okay, so let's say that I believe you. I'll throw out this drunk and disorderly charge. Thank you, sir. But I'll have to charge you with the destruction of government property and endangering the public. That comes with at least a year in jail. So I'll ask you one more time, were you drunk? Yes, sir. Very drunk, sir. Now I think about it, Theodore Bundy jumping out of the courthouse window and running probably didn't do much to convince people that he was innocent. I was in traffic court and the first guy to go before the judge got pulled over doing some crazy speed, like 140 miles per hour. The judge essentially told the guy to say that he wouldn't ever do it again and that it was a mistake, and in return, the judge would drop the ticket fee and the points on his record. The guy countered with, well, I drive fast all the time, so I'm really good at it, and I don't think it was dangerous at all because of how good a driver I am. The guy had the chance to walk out totally free, but instead got a $2,500 fine and 2 points on his record. That reminds me of a story about Butch Cassidy, the famous robber in the Old West. He was captured in Wyoming and brought before a judge. The judge said he would let him go if he promised never to break the law again. Cassidy said he couldn't do that, but he had promised never to break the law in Wyoming, and the judge took that deal and Cassidy lived up to it. Anytime his gang planned a job in Wyoming, he opted out. I'm a reporter and I covered my first murder trial a few months ago. The defendant was a man who had been accused of shooting a family member in the face. The father verified that the only people in the house at the time of the murder were him and the victim. The defense obviously didn't have a lot to work with, but one of their arguments was, the defendant couldn't have done this because the weapon that was used isn't his. Needless to say, the guy was found guilty. Listen, I found them dead before I had my way with them. You see? I'm no expert, but I'd guess that the sentences for defiling a corpse are probably less than murder and the unspeakable act, so maybe that's not the worst defense in that sense. I was a juror on a DUI case. The driver had drunk 6 vodka tonics and 3 beers in about 3 hours. His lawyer tried to argue that electronic interference is what caused him to fail the breathalyzer test. Traffic court. I was the defendant. I showed up in a suit and tie and was waiting for my attorney. Judge was there. First part of the day is just making sure we all show up, and then the city attorney offers us a discount to plead guilty. First-time offenders have to sign up for a class on safe driving to get that 30% off the top. Always fight your tickets, people. Anyway, I wasn't going to accept a plea deal because I had an airtight case. Even my lawyer agreed. She was nice and actually listened to me and did the groundwork. So she shows up, I've already checked in, and she and I refused the initial offer. She then tells me to go wait outside while the city attorney tries again to get me to take the plea deal. So the thing with traffic court is that the officer who wrote the ticket has to actually show up. My attorney was concerned because the guy who ticketed me personally shows. So we go back into court and I'm sitting there and a group of guys come in all wearing ripped jeans and graphic t-shirts with dirty work boots. One of them looks familiar but I can't place him and I figure it's just some more people waiting for tickets. They were actually the cops for the various cases. The judge was not amused. Their defense for their condition was that the court was, quote, too early. Me and about 10 other people all had our tickets dismissed. I have a signed letter from the judge framed. We didn't have to say a thing. The poor city attorney, though, he looked like he was about to die when the judge asked him to speak to him. Like seriously, I honestly feel he felt he was walking to his execution. Is that even the attorney's fault? I don't know that we can really blame him for the state these cops showed up in, or am I missing something here? I was a juror for a case against a woman that was charged with selling a stolen get to a pawnbroker and possession of a weapon by a convicted felon. She took the stand and admitted to finding the item at a friend's house and taking it to the pawnbroker. Her attorney's entire closing argument was that the state failed to prove that it was in fact a firearm and the charges should be dropped. Never mind the fact that she admitted to it being a get, the guy that owned the item said it was his get, and we had it right there in front of us. The defense said it was not a weapon because the state had not fired it to prove it was a firearm. And of course, as soon as we got back to the room to deliberate, one of the jurors said he wasn't convinced it was a real get. That was a real long day. When my cousin was on jury for a domestic case, the woman who was put in the hospital by her boyfriend, she was in a coma for 18 months and couldn't even appear in court. Apparently, the guy pushed her through a door and down the stairs. The guy's defense lawyer was actually trying to get him off with a lighter sentence, but then the guy opened his mouth and tried using the defense of, if she would have just listened to me about not touching my weapon, I wouldn't have gotten so mad. I didn't think the push was strong enough to put her through the door. I didn't mean to put her in a coma, it just happens. When my cousin told me this, I couldn't believe it. He ended up spending 3 years in jail and is no longer allowed to possess weapons. He was deemed mentally incapable of handling such things. Court. A guy said he'd been speeding accidentally because the speedometer in the exotic foreign car he borrowed was marked in kilometers, not miles. The judge, who I guess failed at math, actually bought this defense, even though driving at 85 miles per hour would have been displayed as 136 kilometers per hour. What idiot idea at your work caused a mass walkout? They laid off half the company with no warning. This included a gentleman who was less than a year from retirement and had been there for more than 35 years. The company was shocked when half the remaining people abandoned ship shortly afterwards. The company consistently outpaced competing firms and found itself emerging as one of the industry-leading agencies. This was also a California tech firm, so shorts, flip-flops, beers at lunch, getting high on the roof were all pretty common. But we were rapidly growing, and the atmosphere and location made us a hot ticket for talent. Anyway, the CFO and CMO cashed out, and the CEO decided to completely remodel the company by making it far more corporate. On top of all of this, they implemented unattainable goals and removed our work-from-home policy. The final straw was they removed our rather generous vacation policy and replaced it with unlimited vacation, which was a facade for, you can take as much vacation as you want if we approve it. They didn't approve much, by the way. Like a quarter of the company quit and immediately landed at better jobs. Also, profits tanked. Our company is doing incredible. Let's change everything. Task failed successfully. Turned out our owner was keeping the social security money taken from our paychecks. And yes, he was caught. restructure of the way we're paid. What I used to do involved about 40% client interaction, 20% team and coworker interaction, and 40% paperwork and case coordination stuff. Based on what we do, that means about 40% of the time is technically billable, and there are only really sticky rules for what is and isn't billable. So logically, we're being paid on a salary model. Queue management saying we can only make money for the time we have that's actually billable. A quarter of the department up and quit. 2 of us on the same day. The owner died and his idiot son took over and decided that the company didn't make him enough money and started implementing cost-cutting measures like turning off the AC in the building. Yes, well, employees don't need our help maintaining their body temperature to be able to do their jobs. You know what? I hear that most people's immune systems can resist a degree of bacteria, so let's stop using treated water in the water system too. I think I've just summarized the thinking style of a new owner of a previously successful business. The owners retired. They were wonderful people. Both very sweet, but kept the place running like a well-oiled machine. They took pretty good care of us and their restaurant. When they left, they gave the place over to their nephew, who at the time was a busboy and waiter. Kinda standoffish, didn't really interact with us too much, a bit lazy at times, but for the most part, did his stuff and went home. He seemed okay. That is, until he got the power of being the owner. He fired 4 people, including 2 of the 4 cooks and 2 of the 3 dishwashers, literally the same day, on a Friday night just before the dinner rush, all because he didn't like their attitude. He refused to allow people to take vacation that they'd already requested, and got confirmed by the original owners. He'd change the schedule randomly without telling anyone, and then scream at people when they missed a shift or came in late because of it. He'd refuse to replenish the kitchen until we were literally out of things, then take forever to put in the orders. He showed up randomly and would drink at the bar, for free of course because he was the owner, and then bring in all of his buddies to drink with them, and together they'd get way out of hand and grab at women and try to start fights. Within the first month of him being the owner, over half of the staff had quit, usually walking out literally in the middle of their shifts after being screamed at, as they'd basically throw down their aprons and tell everyone else that they were so sorry but they couldn't do it anymore. After the last cook, this big guy who usually kept the kitchen laughing and running at a decent pace, started crying in the middle of his shift and dropped everything he was doing after the boss came and yelled at him for being slow and making slop, just walked out, the rest of us bailed along with him. 4 months later, the place was closed. His aunt and uncle were absolutely furious and devastated that he'd run the business they'd built up over 30 years into the ground. When they tried to reach out to find out what had happened, because they'd moved out of state, they were absolutely horrified to hear how he had behaved towards the staff. But by that point, it was too late to do anything about it. But on the whole, yeah, they shouldn't have just up and left to retire without giving him a few months in training wheels to make sure that he could actually hack it. Anytime I've seen a mass exodus, it's because of poor management. I've never seen it organized, just a bunch of employees independently deciding to quit in the same month because the management was so bad. I used to work at McDonald's and we had a terrible manager who hated a lot of people working there. Everyone else hated him too, but no one wanted to call him out on his crap and quit. I was the first to do it because I requested 2 weeks off in August of that year, about 3 months in advance. My family likes to plan our summer vacations early on. When August came around, he had my schedule set up for all of August off except for those specific 2 weeks. There was no way he could have misinterpreted my request. When I got my schedule, I stormed into the restaurant, called him out on everything, and then quit on the spot. About 2 weeks after that, I heard from one of my work friends that 5 other people had had enough and quit as well. I kind of felt good about being the first. New management. In a month, 4 kitchen staff quit, leaving me to be the only original kitchen staff hire from the previous manager. This new person completely changed the vibe of the workplace. No one was happy, no one felt like talking or listening to music or being friendly. It was robotic. When I was 16, I worked in the concessions stand at a minor league baseball stadium. Minimum wage at the time was $5.15 an hour. This job paid $8, and it was always in the evenings, so it was perfect work for a high school student. The only bad thing was our management was terrible. The main manager would throw toddler tantrums about once a shift over stupid bullcrap, like not ordering enough of a specific beer. She did the ordering, by the way, or running out of pre-cut lemons for tea. One night, the stadium was running a promotion and it was incredibly busy, easily 2 to 3 times the normal volume of customers. We were already working our butts off handling multiple roles, each with absolutely no downtime. Although we all cleaned as we worked, nobody had a chance to do thorough cleaning for the whole shift because of the never-ending horde of hungry baseball fans. The manager showed up 3 or 4 hours late, as per usual, and threw the biggest fricking temper tantrum over the unswept floor. Finally, she announces, "Listen up, you lazy Fs. Minimal work gets minimal pay. Everyone's being paid minimum wage tonight because you slobs won't clean up anything." Both of our bartenders and the bar back quit on the spot, which caused a chain reaction. We all took off our aprons and hats to leave. She blocked the exit and was red in the face from screaming, so one of the cooks climbed out of one of the big serving windows where we serve customers. So I did the same and most of the staff followed. Bear in mind that this all happened in front of about 200 customers. Of course, my final paycheck got lost, so I had to file a wage theft complaint with the Texas Workforce Commission. Filed the complaint, submitted my clock-in and clock-out receipts for the week, we got paid weekly, and previous pay stubs to verify my pay rate. After about 3 weeks, I was contacted by the person handling my claim, saying that my previous employer had mailed me a check for the whole amount I was owed plus a penalty. The check arrived within a few days, and the penalty was $25 if I recall correctly. Later that year, the same employer refused to provide my W-2 for tax filing, so I filed a complaint with the IRS and used my pay stubs with a special form to complete my taxes. I don't know what happened regarding that, but that lady's life imploded for non-work-related reasons. She got caught cheating on her husband, then got caught faking cancer for sympathy. Who would have guessed that someone so completely and utterly incapable of being a decent human being at work would also show the same decorum to her partner and society at large? A fate well deserved. Hopefully being knocked down a few pegs will give her some empathy. I did landscape construction. The cheap owner kept taking bigger and bigger projects while never hiring more help. We were all overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious as hell. One of our foremen quit, and I followed suit a few days later. 2 more guys quit the next day. He was down to 3 guys for the obscene amount of work he wanted to do. Of course, everything got way behind schedule, but he was convinced it wasn't his fault at all. He went out of business less than a year later. I was hired by the new owners to replace the existing manager. I was under the impression that he was moving on to another job somewhere else. So, after about 4 days, I ask him where he's headed and if he's excited. He just looks at me blankly and says, "I'm not going anywhere. I'm just training you as the assistant manager, right?" The look I gave him must have been a great tip-off because he got up and walked into one of the new owner's offices. After about 30 seconds, they were screaming at each other, and then he just storms out of the office, grabs his stuff, gives me the finger, and leaves. Over the next few days, I was trying to calm things down with the employees. They're not faulting me, but now they have a very bad taste in their mouths about the new ownership. Over about a 7 to 10 day period, my team shrank from 15 people down to 3. I hobbled along the best I could while we tried to hire new people, but the new owners were offering so little we had trouble finding them. After 3 months or so of that, I started to get fed up and overwhelmed, and when the owners started to get on to me about missed deadlines, I'd had it. We were still only at 5 people, 2 of whom were brand new and still training. They didn't allow me to refuse work or push deadlines out, and they expected the same output as a 15-person team. So, after my 3rd day in a row of being berated for missing a deadline that was impossible to make, I quit. Hiring you to replace him without telling him is evil. Hiring you to replace him without telling you they haven't told him is dumb. At that point, there isn't much to do except try and make the best of it, but I'm glad you were able to get out of there. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm the manager of a retail store and I'd found out the cashier was stealing product by scamming reward card benefits. I came up with a detailed incident report to present this to the employee, and I was under the assumption it was just her. After I confronted her in a reasonable manner, she freaked out and got really angry and quit on the spot. She was using fake accounts instead of using a customer's reward card to get herself points and redeem them for products and gift cards. So, the customers weren't getting the points they were owed, which was a headache for me if they notice and complain. The next day, every other cashier called me and quit, and after thinking, what the frick just happened? I found out they were all in on it and were using this lady's fake card on their shifts as well. So I'm down 4 cashiers and I have 1 left. The same day, my last remaining cashier disappeared for 20 minutes. Turned out she was in the bathroom with another employee doing the nasty. She quits because her dad's a cop and doesn't want to find out she got fired for this, and she also asked me if she should go to urgent care because she didn't take out her tampon before they did it, and she couldn't find it. The guy also quit because he didn't care and was moving anyway. I was down to literally managers only. So, the first part is the mass walkout and the last part was just for, can you believe this crap? I was working for a very large IT company before the tech bubble burst, and we had a meeting with our new director and the VP. They were tired of people complaining about things that should be changed at the job and how they managed people. So, they sat around 200 of us down in our auditorium, and the director said she didn't want to hear any more complaints on how she was running things, and if we didn't like it, there was the door, and that there was no way we'd leave such a great job. Well, there was a mass exodus and probably close to 50 people left within 2 months. She and the VP were reorged and given 0 reports, and they were gone after a round of layoffs happened shortly after. I worked at Wendy's, and one of the regional managers started running a store because they couldn't and wouldn't find new managers to replace the old ones. Well, anyways, this guy practically ran the place into the ground. Before he started running the store, most everyone liked working there as it was a good environment. A few months later, a couple of people quit because of him. And one day I rolled in at 9 to help open the store, and he came out to my car as soon as I parked. I was 5 minutes early and usually just sat in my car until 9. He tells me, "Hey, you need to start early because the 3 openers just quit on me." We managed to get the store open and had a number of people from other stores come in to help run the place until the people from the next shift came in. A couple of days later, I heard the full story of what happened from a coworker. The regional manager was supposed to be at the store at 7 or so, and the openers 30 minutes later. He didn't actually show up until 8:30. So when the openers, already being annoyed at having to be at work really early and not being on the clock, saw the manager roll in and knew it was going to be an awful shift, they all decided that they were done with him and just quit right there. So at least 6 people quit because of him by the time I left the place. Probably more left after me. Cancelled all raises and bonuses for everyone except the CEO, his wife, who was financial and HR, and his son, who was utterly useless IT, in a year where we had record profits and brought in almost double the clients, on top of announcing they aren't looking to hire more people when we were already overwhelmed. Good part about it was, when the majority of us quit, they lost almost every single client shortly afterwards to their competitors, and the company is now defunct. Haha, get wrecked, jerks. I can almost get making cuts like that if a company is bleeding, but if it's doing well and the board, or even more offensively, just the employees hired based off their families are getting raises, then the company deserves to die. Worked at a data company. The guys in the sales department messed around all day. They'd be literally in the parking lot drinking beer and racing RC cars. When it came to handling accounts and clients, they frequently gave away free accounts in order to retain customers and make their own sales numbers look good, and somehow they got away with it. Meanwhile, there were dozens of programmers and database nerds working tirelessly behind the scenes to integrate a bunch of complicated data and make it easy to access via the website. Yearly holiday announcements came around, and upper management decided to send the entire sales team to Hawaii for an all-expense-paid vacation. When the furious developers asked why they were just taking the sales team, the confused CEO said, literally, "Well, I guess we could ask the sales team to pick one person from each department who helped them the most this year and take them too." The programmers, engineers, and database people were livid and walked out in droves. Gee, I wonder why the company tanked. Several years ago, I worked in a mental health center. We worked primarily with kids. It was time for the center to renew their certification. Instead of keeping up with everything that needed to be done over the course of 5 years, the proper procedures were ignored. In this couple of months before recertification, the administration made us sit through a ridiculous amount of training on things that would have been covered in training such as IDOWorkHereLady laws and identifying people who were mistreating children. Then came our paperwork. Our center encouraged us to do things that weren't exactly covered by Medicaid or approved through certification. For example, taking kids to the park isn't allowed, but guess where they instructed us to take these kids so that they didn't disturb the therapists working? I had to go back and edit 5 months' worth of documents to get rid of the evidence. The kicker was that the bathrooms were supposed to have a log of when it was cleaned. An administrator perfectly forged the signatures of multiple employees. I don't think they would have gone to the effort just for a bathroom log, so what else were they forging our signatures on? The potential risk of being charged with Medicaid fraud was too high for me. I quit, as did many others. The school district I sometimes sub in had a big round of hiring. A bunch of building substitutes applied for the jobs, and only about half of them got interviews. Of the subs that got interviews, myself included, the only ones who made it past the screening interview was a relative of a current employee. The rest of us subs apparently weren't the right fit. The real reason is that there's a substitute shortage and they don't want to lose any of us. Not a single sub who wasn't a relative was hired for one of over a dozen teaching jobs. Many of the building subs just aren't coming back next year. Many years ago in high school, I worked at a movie theater. The place was pretty poorly run from the moment I started there. We never got paid on time, and management was basically a bunch of lazy idiots who sat in the office talking all day and never actually did any managing. It would have been hard for things to have gotten any worse, but after a couple of months they brought in new management who seemed to want to make it their personal mission to run the theater as poorly as possible. They first decided to implement a new policy requiring all projectionists to wear ties, despite the fact that projectionists are never seen by the public, not to mention the tiny detail that projectionists work around giant, rapidly spinning objects that a tie could get caught in. Management refused to reconsider the policy, and every single projectionist quit as a result. They then decided that the door people, of which I was one, who were always scheduled 7 days a week, would now only be scheduled on weekends, and refused to reassign any of us to concessions on the weekdays so we wouldn't lose hours. As a result, almost every single door person quit, including me. After that, they started imposing impossible cleanliness standards on concessions, things like requiring them to scrape popcorn kernels out of the cracks in the trim behind the popcorn machines. Concessions was there until 5 a.m. every single day trying to meet their standards. Most of the concession people quit as a result. By my count, the theater went from a staff of about 50 to a staff of about 12 in 3 weeks. I swung by about a month after I quit and found out the entire management staff had been fired and replaced yet again by an entirely new one, ones who actually seemed to be running the theater properly. My best guess is that the previous management had been told to whip the theater into shape, and they were idiots who had no idea how to effectively do that. Our boss had a meeting and announced a new policy that all salaried employees had to work a minimum of 45 billable hours per week because of the increased project load we had. I pointed out to a few co-workers that our employment contracts specified 37.5 hours per week and that I'd be adhering to that policy. Well, about a week later, I was laid off due to a lack of projects. I was happy to go, and at least 2 others left voluntarily within the week. The job I found next was much better and wasn't run by someone quite so clueless about how to treat people. The company changed from 5 to 8 hour shifts to a 12-hour shift rotation. Most of the people that quit were the ones that were on straight day shift and didn't want to or couldn't work night shifts. Yeah, try telling every employee with a family or kids to collect from school that they can no longer do so. Good luck, let me know how that goes. Jeez, what were they thinking? Worked in construction as part of an HSE team. The chief engineer was angry that the job was taking slower because of the HSE, especially safety procedures. We had a couple of lost time incidents at this point, and just a week before a guy almost died, but he was still pretty angry about the delays, so he gathered everyone into a room to say, "You're not here to do your jobs, you're here to do what I tell you." 20 people asked to quit on the spot. Frickin' C-word. Working at a local restaurant that had recently changed owners. Multiple issues came up: difficulty getting off for important things, him hiring people to work in the kitchen who were bad at their job but cheaper ingredients, as well as the owners just kind of sitting around and drinking while they're not doing much. Things were tense, and after a couple of months we were really just hanging in there because we liked each other. The previous owners were a sweet old couple that set a great vibe. I know some others and I were already looking for jobs. Anyways, there was a young mother who waited tables there and really needed the money. She couldn't afford to be between jobs. One night she got a call that her grandmother had had a severe stroke and was unresponsive and wasn't expected to make it through the night. She asked to get off and start her 3-hour drive to Dallas. The manager says of course, but the owner says no. Manager and owner got into a verbal fight in the back. The waitress ended up pleading her case, crying. The manager said if the owner wouldn't let her go, he was done. The owner ended up firing them both on the spot. Within the next 15 minutes, everyone who hadn't been a recent hire ended up walking out of the building. 7 of us walked out. A waitress, a cook, a dishwasher, and the busboy stayed. I actually never followed up to see if they finished the shift, but I think they did. I and 1 other were the last of the originals there. We banged out the last couple of tickets we had that were placed before the walkout. Not their fault, and I do take some pride in my work. The quality and attendance dropped for a year before the owner sold to a different guy with actual restaurant experience. The original couple returned to reopen the restaurant, and it's still going today. I'm not going to name names. There's no point, just let sleeping dogs lie. The waitress did make it in time to say goodbye before her grandmother passed. ICE contacted the in-house temp service, questioning them about illegal workers. Over 20 people mysteriously disappeared at lunchtime. A couple of months later, most of them were back, with different names. They decided after 6 years it was time to do a substance test. Even lost the CEO in that great idea. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.